Chapter 69. To devote one's life, saying that, Wu Qi took out 2 dark green transparent tablets with faint streaks of dark red jade, handing them over to He. These are my and Xiao Li's life jade tablets. They're refined from our blood. If the jade tablets are broken, we will be overcome with great sorrow, then finally die. He took the jade tablets, her fingers lightly touching the warm surface. After her divine senses had slightly examined them, she believed the youth's words. These jade tablets stored extraordinary spiritual power inside, and she could faintly sense auras similar to the 2 children. However, He's heart still had doubts. Why did you find me? With Xiao Li's extraordinary ability, this world would have plenty of people willing to offer shelter to you. I don't have any defensive abilities, so why should you find me? In this world, many greedy people want to take advantage of us, even stripping us to the bone to obtain our benefits. Wu Qi revealed a ridiculing bitter smile on his face, immediately after he raised his head and looked towards He, his gaze shining. Xiao Li said, "Young master is a good person. I would like to believe in Xiao Li's judgment." He fiddled with the jade tablets in her hand while sneering, "Oh, a good person? This is the first time I've heard someone evaluate me that way. Is it because I saved you?" Xiao Li, who had still been hiding behind Wu Qi, timidly peeked her head out, her voice like a mosquito's. "You are a good person. The animals in the ground and little birds have told Xiao Li. Moreover, brother has said, for the kindness of saving a life, one must devote one's life. Therefore, Xiao Li and brother want to follow you." When Wu Qi heard that, his face turned red, embarrassedly saying, "Xiao Li, don't speak randomly. To devote one's life isn't used like that." Xiao Li blinked in confusion, her glass-like colored eyes fixedly staring at her brother, before switching to look at He. He put the jade tablets away, lightly laughing. "Since it's like this, then you two can stay. However, I'll tell you now, if you follow at my side, you need to be completely loyal and keep anything you hear to yourselves. For every day that I'm alive, I'll certainly protect you. But if you dare to betray and scheme against me, I dare to guarantee that you would suffer to where it would feel like having your heart pierced by thousands of arrows." He's words made Xiao Li jump with shock, so she hid behind Wu Qi's back again in fear. However, Wu Qi sighed in relief. This kind of fondness and hate was clearly a promise and a warning that made him feel relieved. Relief at handing over the life jade tablets, relief at vowing their loyalty and devotion, and relief at entrusting his sister. Wu Qi dragged Xiao Li to He's side, gently stroking her head. His eyes exposed his sadness and a strong reluctance to part, his voice heavy. "Good Xiao Li, you must listen to young master's words. Do you know that? Brother will soon come back to find you." "Brother?" Xiao Li pulled at Wu Qi's sleeve, tears streaming down her face, her eyes filled with unwillingness. She knew her brother had to leave her to do something dangerous, but she didn't know if her brother would able to return safely, so she was extremely reluctant and sad. However, she knew that the thing her brother wanted to do, he would certainly accomplish it. She shouldn't be crying, otherwise it would make her brother sad too. Xiao Li tightly clutched Wu Qi's sleeve while crying. "Brother, Xiao Li will be obedient. I'll wait for brother to return, so brother, you must come back soon." When Wu Qi finally walked away, Xiao Li wiped her tears, but new tears fell straight away. He, who was standing on the side, looked at the sky. The agreed time for meeting with Nangongyu was approaching, so she finally sighed and walked forward to place a hand on Xiao Li's small head. "Why do you have to cry? It's not like you two will be separated forever. Your brother is very powerful, he will certainly come back." Chapter 70. You're not allowed to call me your highness. Hell King. After this youth called Wu Qi had recovered from his injury, He had examined him but was completely unable to detect his cultivation base. She could only say that his strength was definitely stronger than her own. Moreover, it wasn't just stronger by a little. Xiao Li felt He's gentle caress and a surge of emotion rose within her heart, so she turned around to hug He, crying, "Xiao Li doesn't want brother to die." "Wu," He helplessly said, all right, I'll promise you as long as your brother returns. If he's sustained any heavy injuries, I will cure him. If it's like this you feel more assured, right?" Xiao Li cried again, wiped her nose and tears on He, then under He's comfort, ceased her crying. Hashi told her to go to the courtyard to find wet Nurse Chen, then hurriedly headed towards Wanfeng tea house. She was just about to use her qing gong to quickly depart, when suddenly, from behind Hashi, she heard Xiao Li's childish voice, hoarse from crying too long. I knew Big Sister was a good person. Xiao Li likes Big Sister the most. Hashi's foot stumbled, causing her to nearly fall to the ground. To be able to communicate with animals and so on, it's good to use it against an enemy, but to use it on her, that's too troublesome. She wouldn't have any privacy. Hashi arrived at Wanfeng tea house in a hurry, where Nangong Yu was already waiting. Seeing the picturesque appearance of a youth dressed in white clothes and a fur coat slowly walk over, Nangong Yu's originally indifferent eyes suddenly shone bright. Even the corner of his mouth lifted into a slight smile. Qing Long, who stood on the side, had followed Nangong Yu for many years. He could clearly sense that his master's mood was very good today. As he snuck a peek at the jade crest that bound the youth's hair, Qing Long felt his mouth twitch, breaking his cold and indifferent expression. Master's attitude towards this boy was very good. He had been waiting impatiently in the tea house since early in the morning, and before going out, he had even changed his clothes several times. This in no way resembled the behavior of one going out to meet an ordinary youth lacking cultivation. This was just like he was going out to meet his beloved person. When Hashi saw Nangong Yu, she felt herself become absent-minded in an instant. That man, amongst the youths, possessed a handsome face that could turn all people upside down. At this moment he was dressed in a dark purple brocade robe embroidered with a line of silver. Attached to his waist he wore a ring of tassels, and a jade crown sat upon his head, containing his fine black hair, exposing his exquisite facial features and the smiling expression in his eyes. The faint morning light shone down on him, and the man's eyes looked straight at her. The light in his eyes was luminous, as if they reflected the world and all living things. However, as it happened, it was only to her that he showed this expression. Hashi's heart slammed against her chest, almost completely absorbed in that focused gaze. But the next moment, she recalled Zhu Kei's warning. Remembering that she felt that it was beneath her dignity last night, she felt a slight throb in her heart, very quickly replacing her expression with a cold stare. A trusted servant's attitude was sometimes a reflection of their master's mind. This man before her eyes was the outstanding and famous king of hell, the talented genius who formed a gold core at just 15 years old. How could he care about her, the kind of trash that didn't know whether she would be able to cultivate or not? Hashi retained the expression on her face, and taking several steps forward said, "Your Highness, Hell King, I've arrived. May I ask now how I can remove the seal on my dantian?" Nangong Yu's face suddenly sank, the smiling expression in his eyes disappearing as his body released a sharp burst of power pressure. "I've already said that you're not allowed to call me Your Highness, Hell King again." Hashi jolted from the invisible power pressure, her face paling. No matter how hard she thought about it, she still couldn't figure it out. How could he become so displeased just because of an address? However, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him, so she immediately corrected herself. "Nangong Yu, a moment ago I was wrong." Chapter 71, 5th rank Yuan Yang fruit. Once the words had left her mouth, she despised herself for acting so servile to curry favor. She didn't do anything wrong. Why should she have to lower herself to acknowledge her supposed mistake? Nangong Yu's expression lightened slightly as he released a faint laugh. "In the future, if you repeat your mistake, this king will certainly not forgive you easily." Hashi was scared by those luminous eyes. They seemed to have yet another deep meaning in their gaze as they watched her. Without waiting for her to retort, she heard Nangong Yu continue speaking. "Let's go. There's some distance from here to our destination. We're talking while walking." Nangong Yu's cultivation base had already reached the stage where he was able to fly. However, Hashi was just an ordinary person. Furthermore, there's a rule in Yanjing City that forbids martial artists from large-scale fights, as well as an order banning them from disturbing people by flying in the air. Therefore, the two of them walked side by side as they leisurely exited the tea house into the street. Nangong Yu looked tall and handsome, graceful and outstanding, while Hashi looked elegant and refined, a pure and bright youth. The two of them walking together naturally became a grand view, able to attract the attention of all living things. Passers-by who were coming and going occasionally turned their heads as they walked by them, their stunned gazes firmly attached to the pair. It even was to the point where they would walk right into a wall, completely unaware of their surroundings. If you want to remove the seal on your muddled dantian, you need a yang object. In this world, a yang object is very difficult to find, but fortunately, the power of your seal has gradually weakened. Now you only need to find a fiery yang object at its peak. That will do. The effect of a 5th rank yuan yang fruit, 1, is more than enough. Yuan yang fruit? Even though Heshi knew almost nothing about this world, she did know about 5th rank spiritual plants. Their value was so high that no matter how much yuan she has, she would still be unable to obtain one. Nangong Yu saw her anxious face and looked left and right before he continued speaking to her. Do you know the Ouyang family? Heshi's expression stiffened, and shaking her head, she whispered, I didn't even know you were the famous Hell King. How can I know who the Ouyang family is? Nangong Yu leaned his head closer as he looked at her, saying meaningfully, in the country of Jinling, the Ouyang family, Nailan family, and Murong family are the 3 great influential families. The master of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Jixiong, controls hundreds of thousands of troops and horses and was bestowed the title of the mighty general. It could be said that no one in Yanjing City doesn't know who he is. Heshi grew flustered under his gaze and quickly said, What does all this have to do with me? Nangong Yu slightly laughed. Although 5th rank spiritual plants aren't regarded as high level, but because of the yuan yang fruit's particular attribute, they are very rare. It just so happens that Ouyang Jixiong has 2 yuan yang fruit in his hands. Heshi's eyes suddenly brightened, then immediately after she frowned. Since yuan yang fruit is so precious, and Ouyang Jixiong a famous general, how could it be possible for him to easily sell yuan yang fruit to me? Not to mention, she couldn't afford to buy such a precious thing. Of course he won't sell it. Nangong Yu shook his head. However, Ouyang Jixiong only has one son, Ouyang Haoshuan. He was considered a genius amongst his peers, as at only 26 years old, his cultivation base had already reached gold core stage. Unfortunately, a year ago when he was cultivating in Magical Beast Forest, he was attacked, and not only was his cultivation base completely crippled, even the muscles and tendons throughout his body were severed. Ouyang Jixiong had invited doctors from throughout Jinling, even seeking help from the Doctors Association, but he still couldn't find anyone capable of treating Ouyang Haoshuan's illness. Ouyang Haoshuan is the only direct bloodline descendant of the Ouyang family, so if he dies, Ouyang Jixiong's position as the family's master will likely fall to a distant relative. Therefore, Ouyang Haoshuan's illness isn't limited to his own life and death, it also affects the fate of the whole Ouyang family. You tell me, which would be more important, 2 insignificant yuan yang fruit, or the fate of the Ouyang family? 1. Yuan yang yuan can mean first, origin, while yang can mean son, male. Chapter 72, Ouyang Manor. Heshi was stunned after hearing that, and after quite a while, she finally murmured, You taking me to Ouyang Manor, is it because you want me to cure Ouyang Haoshuan's illness? What? You don't have any confidence you'll be able to do it? Nangong Yu smiled sarcastically. If you don't have the ability to cure Ouyang Haoshuan's illness, we better return home now before it's too late. Afterwards I'll just find another yuan yang fruit for you. Nangong Yu's implications were barely spoken, yet Heshi had already raised her eyebrows, her elegant face filled with confidence as she proudly asked, Who said I didn't have any confidence? I can't cure a mere meridian fracture? As the girl disguised as a youth said these haughty words, her beautiful phoenix eyes narrowed slightly, bursting with a silvery purple light. Those dazzling eyes were like a whirlpool, firmly attracting Nangong Yu's attention. Curiously extending his hand, he gently held Heshi's wrist as he softly asked, Yesterday, I sent my people to give you medicine, have you used it? Finished asking, he lifted Heshi's sleeve to see her arm. Who knew that he had asked the wrong question, as once he asked it, Heshi recalled the unpleasant experience from last night. Her expression cold, she quickly withdrew her hand. Don't trouble yourself. Just a small insignificant injury means nothing to me. That's right, whether it's the Heshi of her previous life, or the Nalan Hishi from this present life. She has long since become accustomed to these types of physical injuries, so they meant nothing. She has always managed everything on her own, so she doesn't need concern from other people now. Nangong Yu's eyes darkened, wanting to argue with her, but seeing her stubborn face he sighed, secretly transmitting his voice into her mind instead. Remember, don't reveal your identity as Nalan Hishi. Nowadays, Ouyang family and Nalan family hate each other to the bone. If they knew of your identity, it's unknown whether we would be able to get the Yuan Yang fruit or not. Hashi frowned, and just when she was about to ask what grudges the two families held, Nangong Yu softly interrupted, "We've arrived." Ouyang Manor. At this moment, in Ouyang Haoshuan's room, the door and windows were tightly closed, the entire room circulating a strong medicinal smell. The air was stale, making people feel nauseous. The inside of the room was filled with specks of candlelight, also several priceless night pearls. But due to the lack of sunshine, the room was still pitch black, carrying an oppressive feeling that made a person feel suffocated. Currently, Madame Ouyang sat on the short couch beside the bed, her hair messy, eyes red and swollen, with medicine stains not yet wiped up on her clothes. She watched her son on the bed who had been tortured like a puppet, begging while crying grievously, "Haoshuan, mother begs you to obediently take your medicine, all right. If you don't take these medicines, your 5 viscera and 6 bowels will soon become exhausted and you'll die." On the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan's face was dejected, his beard had grown long and unkempt, making him look ragged, while his eyes were sunken in. His entire person was brimming with a depressed aura of one nearing death. He laughed loudly when he heard what was said, his hoarse voice carrying despair. "Mother, I also beg you, just let me die? Living without dignity like this, without the strength to even commit suicide, then what's the point of being alive? It's better to kill me, let me die a clean death." Heard that, Madame Ouyang's crying became even more grievous, and throwing herself on the edge of the bed, she grabbed her son's hand, murmuring, "Xian heir, your father has already gone to seek help from the Doctors' Association, searching all lands under the heavens for good medicine. In this world, there will inevitably be a person who will be able to cure you. You can't give up now. Mother, you mustn't deceive me and yourself again." Ouyang Haoshuan's throat issued a gurgling noise, like a dying old woman's low cough. "Even Nalan Jingza has come and seen me but couldn't cure me. I absolutely can't be cured. In this lifetime, I've been destined to an early end. Mother, just let me die, okay?" Chapter 73, Ouyang Haoshuan's despair. "Mother only has you, this one child." Madame Ouyang wailed, grabbing Ouyang Haoshuan's hands. She didn't want to let go. "If you die, what about mother? What about your father? Xian heir, those people who harmed you still haven't received retribution, and now that Ouyang family's relatives are eager for you to die, are you truly willing? To die cowardly like this, are you in such a rush for your parents to be so full of sorrow and hatred?" Ouyang Haoshuan stayed expressionless, his blank eyes projecting his despair while unwilling tears gathered. Previously, he was Ouyang family's most dazzling genius. Other people looked up to him, envied him, admired him. He was the pride of his parents. He was also Ouyang family's future hope. However, in the blink of an eye, that genius had crumbled into dust. The fine jade was covered in dust and shattered into hundreds of pieces, his cultivation base and body becoming crippled, turning him into a person who couldn't even take care himself. Every day, besides lying down on the bed, he couldn't do anything. He even needed other people's hands to help him eat, to avoid the food spilling. He has been restricted to laying down in this dark and stale-smelling room for more than a year already. In this 1 year, he has lost all his pride, lost his dignity, and lost his will to live. Every day, he only longed to die quickly, rather than live life like a dead person. However, his mother's words ignited the hatred and wrath lurking deep down in his heart. Those black-dressed people that schemed against him in the magical beast forest, those scums that dragged him into a trap, he still hasn't personally taken revenge, personally making them pay a debt of blood with blood. How can he be willing to die? How can he be willing to give up like this? Inside the room, brimming with Madame Ouyang's weeping sounds, occasionally mixed with Ouyang Haoshuan's destitute beast-like yells, The atmosphere was permeated with despair, enough that it could make a person's heart grieve. Just at this moment, the room's door was suddenly pushed open, and Ouyang Jixiong entered with large steps. His face was devoid of the usual anxiousness. Instead, his eyes shined with astonishment. "Madam, quickly help Haoshuan to tidy up. The genius doctor has arrived. He will immediately come to give medical treatment to Haoshuan." Madame Ouyang startled, wiping the tears from her eyes as she asked, "Genius doctor? Could it be an elder you've invited from the Doctors' Association?" Ouyang Jixiong shook his head. "All the elders from the Doctors' Association are mysterious, their whereabouts uncertain. How could I find them in such a short time? However, this time the one I've found, even though he's not an 8th-rank doctor, his medical skill has reached perfection. Believe me, he will certainly be able to save Haoshuan." Madame Ouyang's eyes shined, and with a trembling voice she asked, Really? My lord, you've truly found a person who is able to save Haoshuan?" "Father, you don't have to waste your energy." Lying on the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan remained unmoved in the slightest. Instead, the expression on his face became more mournful. "Didn't all the doctors that previously come to Ouyang Manor say that I would live, but that my muscles and bones were dead, resulting in how I am now?" His mouth opened a crack, and chuckling, a sinister expression spread across his face. "Every one of them fled after taking my pulse, especially Jin Ling Country's #1 majestic, highly skilled doctor, Nailan Zhengze. After he diagnosed me as incurable, he unexpectedly withdrew my engagement between our Ouyang family and his Nailan family. Even more, the news that I had become a crippled person spread everywhere, making me a laughingstock throughout Jin Ling Ha. Indeed, he's the country's highly skilled doctor, a very good doctor." When he mentioned the Nailan family, Ouyang Jixiong and Madame Ouyang right away started gnashing their teeth with loathing. Because of their political connections, and because of Madame Ouyang and Madame Nailan's handkerchief friendship, the two families had made an agreement for Ouyang Haoshuan and the second Miss, Nailan Feishue, to marry when he was of marriageable age. Handkerchief friendship used to describe childhood friends, or friends who share everything, happiness and sadness. Chapter 74, Genius Doctor is Your Master? Previously, the graceful Ouyang Haoshuan, who was handsome, talented, and outstanding, was a match to Nailan Feishue, who was merely at the foundation establishment stage. Nevertheless, the Ouyang family had still acknowledged this marriage, including the Nailan family, who had regarded it as a decent marriage. But who would have thought that once Ouyang Haoshuan faced difficulties, the Nailan family would turn out to be such hostile people, refusing to acknowledge the marriage and then spreading Ouyang Haoshuan's miserable condition to the public. Ouyang Haoshuan was once a dazzling star, and now that he had fallen into the mud, naturally, the people who had originally envied him now threw stones at him, rejoicing in his misfortune. Now branch relatives from the Ouyang family were covetously eyeing the position of the family's master. Even Nailan Feishue's people that had once admired him came to their door just to sneer at Ouyang Haoshuan. Now that he has become a toad that can't climb up from a mud pit, they go so far as to dare clamor around Nailan Feishue, thinking of her as a swan. Afterwards, the Ouyang family had found out that it was Nailan Feishue and Madame Nailan who had spread those rumors on purpose. This left the Ouyang family no choice but to break the engagement, making everyone focus on Ouyang Haoshuan's decline. No one paid any attention to the Nailan family's ungratefulness over renouncing the alliance contract. Due to these events, the Ouyang family hated the Nailan family to the bone. Especially the vicious and shameless Nailan Feishue, they were itching to tear her apart. Ouyang Jixiong started becoming angry, but seeing his son's grief-filled appearance, he couldn't help but feel sad, his voice soft as he said, "Haoshuan, you are our Ouyang family's hope. How can you say you want to give up? Father guarantees that this time's genius doctor and the previous ones are different. Father personally saw him cure a person with broken meridians. That person is now healthy and able to walk. Believe me, he will certainly be able to cure you." Madame Ouyang was surprised and happy after hearing this, her voice raised in excitement. "My lord, was what you just said true?" "Of course it's true," Ouyang Jixiong said. "Yesterday, when I was with His Highness, Hell King, Together we saw that genius doctor save a person. His Highness, Hell King, and him are acquaintances. It's absolutely not false. Madame Ouyang suddenly started crying with joy, wiping her tears as she said, Hao Xuan. Did you hear that? You can be saved, you can be saved. Quickly call someone to come help young master tidy up, invite the genius doctor to come in. Ouyang Haoxuan's eyes brightened, but immediately after, they once again became gloomy. It's not that he didn't want to be cured, it's just that he had experienced happiness turn to disappointment for more than a year already. It caused the little hope he had carried to long be extinguished, changing it into a deep despair. The moment Heshi walked into Ouyang Haoxuan's room, she sensed depression, deathly silence, darkness, and the intense smell of medicine. Madame Ouyang stared blankly when she saw Heshi, the light of hope in her eyes suddenly extinguishing, transforming into confusion and deep disappointment. She didn't think that this so-called genius doctor would actually be a youth with red lips and white teeth, who looked weak and without any strength. He didn't have the slightest resemblance to a high-level doctor. They normally have the appearance of a sage. However, Madame Ouyang was unwilling to give up and couldn't help but ask, This young master, may I ask, is the genius doctor your master? Is it possible to invite him to come save my family's Haoxuan? Ouyang Jixiong's complexion changed. He glanced at the smile that wasn't a smile on the face of His Highness, Hell King, and quickly took a step forward to stop Madame Ouyang. Madam, don't talk recklessly, this is the exceptionally talented young genius doctor. Madame Ouyang jumped in shock, and as her heart brimmed with despair and disappointment, tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. Heshi had long become accustomed to this kind of situation, where she was judged by her appearance. Previously, although her medical skills were high, they were often used to kill people, not save people. But even then, there is no doctor who wouldn't get angry from not being trusted. So as a result, instead of becoming unwilling, her gaze coldly swept past the Ouyang couple before she then walked to the front of the bed. That she's better than him. Chapter 75, If It Can Be Treated? The ambience in the room was already heavy and gloomy, yet on the bed, it seemed to gather 100-fold. The strong smell of medicine mixed together with a sour, moldy smell, as if it was trying to create the world's gloomiest atmosphere. Ouyang Haoxuan had been lying down in this kind of dark room. His features cold, his skin appearing a pale ashen color, while his eyes were bloodshot in deep-set sockets. At this time, these eyes were fixedly staring at her, not a trace of hope visible, only endless darkness filled with coldness and despair. Obviously, compared to Wu Qi, this person's condition was more severe, regardless of whether it was his body or his spirit. Heshi focused, grabbing his wrist to take his pulse. Once she took his pulse, her eyebrows furrowed. Just like she thought, Ouyang Haoxuan's illness, compared to Wu Qi's, was several times more severe. The meridians throughout his body appeared to be fractured, while several fractures were in extremely crucial places. Once they were severed, forget about only losing spiritual power, just normally sitting or standing up to walk would be unachievable. And most importantly, there was the trace of a highly toxic poison within Ouyang Haoxuan's body, causing his meridians to wither day by day. The poison that resided in his body was the kind that if he attempted to use his internal energy, the poison would feed off it, gradually increasing and spreading. So although fractured meridians would cause the body to be unable to operate and cultivate, a martial artist used their internal energy to live, how could they stop using that? Thus, this poison would keep accumulating until it spread throughout the body, eventually entering the dantian. Heshi didn't know what kind of poison it was, but she thought that the person who used this poison to sever his meridians was extremely sinister. That person not only wanted to make Ouyang Haoxuan fall, but wanted to make him suffer endlessly painful torture before he died. Now, Ouyang Haoxuan's meridians were already withered, close to the extent of being completely blocked. If it was just a few days later, perhaps even she would have been unable to do anything about it. As he laid on the bed, Ouyang Haoxuan saw the youth's grave face, causing him to clench his hands for a moment without loosening them. He couldn't help but sneer, and with a hiss in his voice said, "Don't waste your energy. Since you're unable to treat me, then you should quickly get lost. don't come again to Ouyang Manor to swindle us." At this moment, He had already finished taking his pulse. Withdrawing her hands while looking at the man's face filled with anger, she laughed coldly. "Oh? Then if I can treat you?" Ouyang Haoshuan was speechless, his expression sluggish as he felt himself being looked at by those cold eyes, his entire body freezing. Ouyang Zhixiong quickly said, "Genius Dr. Shi, as long as you're able to cure my son, my Ouyang family is willing to agree to any of your conditions." He tapped her fingers on the table, then turned her head to look around, and suddenly, in a heavy voice said, "Open all the windows, remove this thick bed sheet, and extinguish all the candles. I need this room to be bright with daylight." Madame Ouyang and Ouyang Zhixiong jumped in shock. Madame Ouyang immediately crying out in fear, "Absolutely not. Ever since Haoshuan fell ill, with only a slight breeze and sunshine, his whole body will ache incessantly and spasm as dark spots appear on his skin." "Are you really a genius doctor? Could it be that you want to kill my Xian'er?" At this time, even Ouyang Zhixiong was bewildered, not daring to speak. However, He only sneered, and suddenly taking out a medicinal pill, she stuffed it into Ouyang Haoshuan's mouth. "I assure you, even when he is blown by the wind or exposed to the sun, he'll be all right. You can all either choose to believe in what I'm doing, or just find someone better qualified than me." Chapter 76, Poison saying that, she then headed to the door to leave without hesitation. Nangong Yu saw her eyes shine with a self-confident light, while his eyes reflected an expression of happiness. His woman should have this kind of spirit and imposing attitude. When asking for a favor, it wouldn't make her look humble, rather, it would make people obediently deliver things into her hands. Seeing He about to leave, Ouyang Zhixiong became anxious and glanced at the motionless Hell King. His heart immediately throbbed harshly, and clenching his teeth said, "You've heard Genius Dr. Shi's command, quickly open the windows." "My lord!" Madame Ouyang shouted. Ouyang Haoshuan closed his eyes as he lay on the bed. Tightly clenching his teeth with a grim face, he braced himself for the pain to come. Slowly, a gentle breeze blew into the room accompanied by the warm sunshine, both filled with rich spiritual energy. For a moment, the intense smell of medicine and mold in the room were dispersed by the wind. And with the brightness replacing the darkness, it caused the entire room to no longer be covered in a deep haze, one resembling the underworld. Ouyang Haoshuan hesitated before he slowly opened his eyes. The first thing to enter his sight was the glaringly bright yet warm sunshine. In addition, under the glow of the sun, the youth's exquisite and matchless appearance was visible. He's face was without a smile, without a trace of gentleness or softness, there was only icy arrogance and self-confidence. However, Ouyang Haoshuan's heart that was originally desperate and still, now, for no reason, surged with excitement. "Xian'er, how are you feeling? Do you feel pain anywhere?" Madame Ouyang nervously asked as she rushed to the front of the bed. Ouyang Haoshuan finally reacted. It didn't hurt, he didn't feel any pain. His body was neither spasming or breaking out in dark spots. Furthermore, his internal organs weren't shifting and breaking down from the pain. His astonished gaze fell on He, his mouth opening and closing several times before finally, in a hoarse voice, he said, You're really able to cure me?" He crossed her arms in front of her chest, and faintly said, "Cure what? Cure your fractured meridians? Wasn't General Ouyang already convinced that I have such an ability, only then inviting me to come?" "Yes." Ouyang Zhixiong finally responded. His son being able to stand the wind and sun without reacting in pain had caused him to feel like crying tears of joy, his eyes collecting glistening teardrops in their corners. "Genius Dr. Shi, please use your miraculous hands of a healer, please save my son." Madame Ouyang also finally managed to react, she no longer doubted He's medical skills. Immediately kneeling on the ground, she cried while beseeching He to save her son. He's expression was without doubt or fear as she signaled for Madame Ouyang to rise. "I'll certainly be able to help treat his fractured meridians." However, young Master Ouyang's illness is so severe not because of the muscle and tendon fracture, rather, he was poisoned. "Poisoned?" Ouyang Zhixiong exclaimed, then asked in disbelief, This is impossible. Previously, we had invited countless doctors to diagnose and treat Haoshuan, but not one of them gave even the slightest indication from their examination of Haoshuan that he was poisoned. Is it that in these past few days, someone broke into my Ouyang manor and gave poison to my son? In this world, poisons able to cause harm to martial artists were rare, not just because of the expensive price, but because they were really hard to find. In the end, who was it that was so sinister, being able to see Haoshuan already fallen to such a degree, yet unexpectedly unwilling to let him off? Thinking until here, Ouyang Zhixiong glared in anger, his body emitting a strong power pressure. But Heshi was only an ordinary person, and Ouyang Zhixiong's cultivation base far exceeded her own. Now that this power pressure was completely utilized, although not aimed at her, it was still enough to make her face pale. Chapter 77. Medical treatment. Just at this time, Nan Gongyu walked to her side, his tall figure enveloping her like he could protect her against his chest. In the blink of an eye, Heshi felt the power pressure on her body disappear, her pale complexion returning to normal. She raised her head, and as her eyes came into contact with his, she suddenly thought that his eyes were beautiful. Her reflection visible in his star-filled eyes, his burning gaze nearly melting her. Heshi suddenly lowered her head, took a deep breath, then looked towards Ouyang Zhixiong. No, young Master Ouyang has been poisoned for a very time. It has been at least a year and a half. If my guess isn't wrong, this kind of poison has a 90% possibility of being what caused young Master Ouyang's meridians to be severed in a flash when it was administered into his body. Ouyang Zhixiong stared blankly, immediately asking, what kind of poison is that? Even a fourth-rank doctor couldn't detect it. In this Mi-Luo continent, when a low-rank doctor examines a sick person's body, they rely on their spiritual power to do the examining. Some don't even know where the meridians are located, while even more are unable to make their spiritual power penetrate into the sick person's meridians. This poison attaches itself to the human body's meridians and becomes extremely concealed. It also moves around the body, so based on an ordinary doctor's examination method, how could they find it? However, Heshi wasn't interested in wasting time to explain, only saying, have any of you seen a person with broken meridians unable to stand a gentle breeze or exposure to the sun? That is a symptom of being poisoned, but this poison is extremely sinister and strange. I'm also still unclear about what type of poison this is in the end. In fact, the things Ouyang Haoshuan couldn't tolerate wasn't the wind and sunshine. Rather, it was the spiritual energy that was carried in by the wind and sunshine. The spiritual energy makes the poison within his body spread rapidly and expand, causing Ouyang Haoshuan to experience a pain similar to that of being bitten and devoured. For her medical treatment this time, she needs a great amount of spiritual energy to enter Ouyang Haoshuan's body. So naturally, she will make the spiritual energy outside the room come in. But Madame Ouyang didn't care about the cause and effects, only asking with an anxious face, may I ask if genius doctor she has a method to treat this illness? Heshi pursed her lips, I was just about to try. Following that, her gaze landed on the lifeless expression of Ouyang Haoshuan on the bed, and slowly said, my medical treatment requires your cooperation. Now you tell me, do you believe that I'm able to cure you? That is to say, are you willing to accept my medical treatment? Ouyang Haoshuan's eyes blankly fell on her face, and unaware of when, tears were already rolling down his cheeks. He suddenly tightly clenched his teeth until blood leaked from the corner of his mouth, then in a hoarse voice said, please, genius doctor, save me. As long as I'm able to recover, I will certainly face any peril, with no thought to my personal safety, to repay your kindness in the future. Heshi revealed a smile, but the smile didn't express joy. Instead, it was endlessly cold. Very good, I like an obedient sick person. Finished speaking, she once again brought out several hundred different lengths of silver needles from her space. These acupuncture needles were made from black ice. To make them, you needed to use 10,000-year-old black ice from the most central position, where the cold air has gathered inside, and after making the silver needles, they needed to be placed in spring water at all times to soak. Now, it has become her necessary tool to treat and distinguish poisons. Under Madame Ouyang and Ouyang Haoshuan's astonished gaze, Hexi's skills were as quick as lightning. Inserting 100 or more silver needles, one by one, into Ouyang Haoshuan's body. As the number of needles inserted into his body grew, Ouyang Haoshuan's face began to show a pained expression. With his jaw tightly clenched, blood steadily dripped from the corner of his mouth, while bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down from the spot between his tightly wrinkled eyebrows. Haoshuan, how is it? Madame Ouyang stared at his painful appearance, her worried tears streaming down. Genius Dr. Shi, why is Haoshuan in so much pain? Chapter 78, Not Enough Spiritual Power? Then I'll give you mine. Mother, I'm all right. Ouyang Haoshuan chuckled, his voice hoarse. This was the first time he had really laughed. He was brimming with incredible surprise and hope. Mother, my hands, my feet, I feel them. So painful. I feel them. He laughed and laughed, his tears falling down to mix with the blood on the corners of his mouth and the sweat collecting on his face, giving him a miserable yet sinister appearance. Who can understand the grief and despair of one who originally had boundless prospects as a star, yet could now only wait every day to die as he laid on a bed? His hands and feet didn't feel like his own. He couldn't clench his hands, he couldn't stand on his feet. To live like this, wouldn't it be better to die? But now, he could finally feel his hands and feet. After a lapse of a year and a half, he finally could feel the existence of his four limbs again. Ouyang Haoshuan cried tears of joy. So what if the cost was great pain? Compared to the despair and humiliation of before, the pain was insignificant. Madame Ouyang and Ouyang Jixiong's expressions suddenly changed, and they wanted to rush over to the bed. Unfortunately, they could only tearfully endure it as they were afraid they would disturb Hexi's movements. Hexi finally finished inserting all of the silver needles, feeling exhaustion throughout her body. However, the treatment had just begun. The next part was the crucial point. She discovered that perhaps because the people in this world were all martial cultivators, their bodies could endure more. Resembling tempered and refined magical items, the internal energy running in their meridians was much stronger, so compared to her previous life, it was 100 times more difficult, causing her internal energy to be greatly consumed. Ouyang Haoshuan's body had been slowly consumed by poison for more than a year, causing him to become weak. Otherwise, even for her, being able to finish inserting the whole set of 108 silver needles would be a problem. Next, she had to force the poison out through the silver needles, but this was a very difficult process. Shiyu, you can try to use spiritual power. A gentle and low voice suddenly sounded in her ears. Hexi startled, and turning her head, she saw Nangong Yu's dazzlingly bright handsome face, making her heart unconsciously palpitate. It's impossible. With difficulty, Hexi made up her mind, shaking her head. I'm unable to transfer enough spiritual power. It's not that she hadn't thought of using this method, anyone would think of testing it out first. But if she wanted to hasten the expulsion of the poison, she needed to pour internal energy into the countless meridian branches. During this process, if she missed even one spot, the poison would instantly gather, causing Ouyang Haoshuan's body to explode. Using spiritual power would of course be much simpler and more effective than using internal energy, but she simply couldn't store spiritual power. Depending only on the tiny bit she had to penetrate into his meridians and survive, how could it be enough? Still, Nangong Yu only raised a corner of his mouth, laughing slightly. If I tell you try, I'll naturally ensure a way for your spiritual power to be sufficient. Finished speaking, Hexi felt a wide palm press on her sleeve, and from the palm, a warmth was transmitted through her thin clothing to her skin, making her body quiver and stretch closer. Nangong Yu's low laughter, deep and full of magnetism, reached her ears carrying clear delight. Hexi's face darkened, and just when she was about to step away from him, she suddenly sensed refreshing spiritual power slowly infuse her body. The exhaustion in her body instantly disappeared without a trace, and even her originally dried-up dantian began to stir. In a flash, Hexi realized Nangong Yu's intentions. She only needed to continue the treatment, and if she didn't have enough spiritual power, he would replenish it. That sort of lofty and domineering attitude. Hexi's face reddened, however, she no longer refused. Instead, she concentrated, removing a silver needle that was longer than a foot and slightly thicker than hair from her space. Chapter 79. Strange Poison. Under Madame Ouyang's alarmed gaze, she slowly inserted the silver needle into the acupuncture point at Ouyang Haoshuan's spine, continuing to push it in until only a finger length remained visible. The slightest thread of spiritual power gathered at Hexi's back, traveling along her meridians to her fingertips. It then flowed down her fingertips to the silver needles, penetrating into Ouyang Haoshuan's body. Suddenly, an image like an X-ray appeared in Hexi's mind, clearly showing an internal view of the meridian tracks within Ouyang Haoshuan. She could completely see his spiritual power points, the filth that blocked them, and the tiny scars they had left. Under the pressure from the spiritual power, the silver needles inserted into Ouyang Haoshuan's body trembled, and slowly, like rising water, the spiritual power spread and began to repair Ouyang Haoshuan's fractured meridians. Unable to bear it, Ouyang Haoshuan issued a shrill scream. Madame Ouyang's complexion went deathly pale, and she moved to rush forward and check on him, but Ouyang Zhixiong, with a similar complexion, pulled her to a stop. He knew clearly that disturbing a doctor during treatment could affect the outcome, wasting all previous efforts. If that were to happen, then curing Haoshuan really would be hopeless. Hexi's ears were in pain due to Ouyang Haoshuan's screams, so without any hesitation, she seized a rag laying on the side and stuffed it into Ouyang Haoshuan's mouth. Immediately, the only sounds remaining in the room were Ouyang Haoshuan's muffled screams and Madame Ouyang's stifled sobs. Behind Hexi, the corner of Nangong Yu's mouth raised, revealing a slight smile as he pressed against her back. But Hexi didn't care about their reactions, beginning to seriously examine Ouyang Haoshuan's meridians instead. Along with the fractured meridians being repaired, the spiritual power began to move normally again, causing the poison in the meridians to flow quicker. The poison certainly wanted to spread and grow. However, the medicine that Hexi had recently fed to Haoshuan restrained the tiny organisms from reproducing. That was to say, this poison was able to keep increasing due to the fact that it wasn't a simple drug. Rather, it carried a highly poisonous single-celled organism. Hexi's spiritual power very quickly flowed along Ouyang Haoshuan's meridians, invading his dantian. When it penetrated his dantian, it made her scalp feel numb, causing the hand that gripped the large silver needle to almost loosen. Under the influence of inner inspect, caused by the spiritual power, Hexi saw that Ouyang Haoshuan's dantian appeared to be the source of the poison. The outward appearance was ordinary, yet inside, it had long been turned pitch black by the poison. The poison kept moving, and as it advanced towards and traveled along the complicated crisscrossing meridians, it looked like countless small worms crawling about the interior of Ouyang Haoshuan's body. This scene was too strange and horrible. Hexi no longer hesitated, and quickly picking up several additional silver needles, she inserted them around his dantian, frantically gathering the spiritual power from Nangong Yu and sending it into the silver needles. Soon, the poison stopped spreading, starting to be forced to approach the silver needles. Then, it squirmed along the silver needles until it seeped out to the surface of the body. All it took was several breaths' time from the silver needles being inserted into Ouyang Haoshuan's body for them to begin to be covered with thick black droplets. The unknown composition of black droplets carried a strong rotten stench, and while it should obviously be an ordinary liquid, it seemed to have life as it incessantly wiggled. This scene was too strange, causing the complexions of the watching Ouyang Zhixiong and Madame Ouyang to turn purple, their bodies trembling. Quickly grab them. Hexi's words were unfinished when Nangong Yu had already taken out a porcelain bottle, and with the spiritual energy still entering the room, the black liquid was caught without any resistance. It took more than an hour for those silver needles to no longer exude black liquid, but by the end, Ouyang Haoshuan's face that had originally been in pain had gradually relaxed into a tranquil expression. Chapter 80. Compensated Kindness. Hexi heaved a long sigh of relief and began to pull the silver needles out of Ouyang Haoshuan's body one by one. Only after the last silver needle was replaced into her space did she then remove the rag in his mouth. "How are you feeling now?" Ouyang Haoshuan gasped heavily, lingering traces of fear remaining on his face from the severe pain, but even so, his eyes were shining brilliantly. No longer were filled with the despair and lifelessness from a few hours ago. Pain? I can feel pain all over my body, my hands and feet, meridians, even Dannan, all feel a sharp, biting pain. But I can sense spiritual power. The spiritual power is surging into my dantian. I can sense my spiritual power moving again. Madame Ouyang exclaimed in surprise and rushed to Ouyang Haoshuan's side, crying, Xian Er, is what you say true? Genius Dr. Shi, Xian Er has been cured? Heshi replied indifferently, how could it be so easy? The accumulation of poison in his body is very large, it can't be entirely removed in an hour or two. The meridians in his body are also only tentatively repaired. At most, he can only sit, he will also still be unable to walk, and even more, he will still be unable to cultivate. Pausing here, under the husband and wife's hopeful gaze, she continued, in the future, I will need to come here every 3 days to administer acupuncture on young Master Ouyang to continue removing the poison and repairing his meridians. The most dangerous treatment time has passed, there will be no more difficulties when removing the remaining poison. Only that, during treatment, General Ouyang may need to transfuse spiritual power to young Master Ouyang's body to ensure that after the poison is expelled, his dantian won't be exhausted. No problem. No problem. Ouyang Zhixiong repeatedly said, as long as you can cure my son, I'm even willing to deplete my cultivation base. Laying on the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan's eyes reddened. His hand that was being held by Madame Ouyang turned over to hold her hand back. For more than a year he had lived life like a dead person, but it had been even more painful for his parents who loved him and were concerned for him. He decided that in the future he must not become dispirited again, it would only make his parents sorrowful while pleasing his enemies. Heshi took out several medicine pills to help purge the poison and restore energy, giving them to Madame Ouyang. Have him take one every day before he sleeps. It can suppress the poison in his body while helping to nourish his withered meridians. With difficulty, Ouyang Haoshuan stretched out his hands, his eyes filled with glistening teardrops. Supporting himself by holding on to Madame Ouyang, he sat up and looked gratefully at Heshi. Young Master Shi's kindness has given me a new lease on life. I, Ouyang Haoshuan, will remember this as long as I live. In the future, if young Master has any request, I, Ouyang Haoshuan, will tread water and walk through fire, unafraid of any difficulty as long as I can accomplish it. At this time, Ouyang Haoshuan's cheekbones were deep set and covered by a long beard, and with his face so haggard, his appearance was anything but handsome. However, those eyes he used to gaze at Heshi with were shining, causing Nangong Yu to narrow his own in displeasure. Yet Heshi didn't care in the slightest, only coldly saying, "You all don't need to thank me, because for me to expend a great deal of effort to save people is only natural if I have a request. I heard your Ouyang family have yuan yang fruit?" All of a sudden, Ouyang Zhixiong came to a realization as he recalled what Hell King had said before, about him having something the genius doctor was seeking. Quickly, he ordered people to take out his collection of yuan yang fruit. Yuan yang fruit was precious and rare, it possessed a powerful effect of assisting people in advancing a rank. But when it was compared to the safety and life of his son, he regarded it as nothing. Without hesitation, Ouyang Zhixiong handed an exquisitely carved jade box over to Heshi. Heshi opened the jade box and suddenly felt a blazing flame directly hit her face, causing her complexion to instantly change. But the next moment, an invisible barrier was set in front of her and a slender hand reached out to gently close the jade box. Then, a gloomy voice sounded in her ears, "Shiyu, be careful. When using yuan yang fruit, you must first be wrapped with spiritual power, otherwise, you will easily burn yourself." Chapter 81. How about you give your heart to me? Heshi's face reddened and she quickly threw the jade box containing the yuan yang fruit into her space. When she raised her head, she was stunned to notice Nangong Yu's somewhat pale complexion, a thin layer of sweat dotting his forehead. She suddenly realized that after the treatment she didn't feel weak and tired like normal, instead, she felt refreshed. Nangong Yu had incessantly transferred his spiritual power to her for the needed treatment, and during this time, he had also continuously used his spiritual power to support her body. This in turn stopped her body from becoming weak, and prevented her meridians from feeling pain due to excessive use of spiritual power. Nangong Yu, why did he do this? These were obviously her own matters, saving Ouyang Haoshuan in exchange for the Yuan Yang fruit, then after obtaining the Yuan Yang fruit, using it to remove the seal on her dantian. None of these things had anything to do with Nangong Yu, so why would he try so hard to help her? The expression in Heshi's eyes appeared somewhat complicated, and her red lips lightly moved as a near whisper spit out two words, "Thank you." But Nangong Yu's next words quickly scattered the slightly touched feeling from the bottom of Heshi's heart. This king has been working hard. Did you think only saying a sentence of thank you was enough? Heshi pursed her lips. Then what do you want? Nangong Yu bent his body, moving closer to her ear as he slowly said, "How about you give your heart to me?" The corner of Heshi's mouth thinned, and before she was able to speak, Ouyang Zhixiong had already ordered people to bring in a large chest of yuan. "This is the medical fee my Ouyang family presents to genius Dr. Shi. You must accept this." After saying that, he picked up a jade tablet and handed it to Heshi, then patted his chest as he said, "In the future, if there is anyone in this Jinling country who is disrespectful towards genius Dr. Shi, don't hesitate to take out this jade tablet. I'd like to see who would dare to touch people that I, Ouyang Zhixiong, protect." Heshi hadn't yet taken the jade tablet when she heard Nangong Yu's cold laugh. "My, Nangong Yu's people, need General Ouyang's protection?" Nangong Yu's icily low arrogant voice was filled with a stern power pressure, making Ouyang Zhixiong's body shake, and as his gaze swept over Heshi and Nangong Yu, his heart became bewildered. These two people, one is great and elegant, and one is as clear and bright as the moon. When they stand together, even the sun and the moon will lose their radiance. But these two people are both men, right? What was the meaning behind Hell King's words? Ouyang Zhixiong's expression kept changing until finally, under Hell King's fixed gaze, he forced out a smile and said, "Hell King, don't get angry. In this Jinling country who would dare to provoke your people, it was me who was rude. This jade tablet is just a meeting gift between genius Dr. Shi and I. Please don't be offended." Heshi cast a glance at Nangong Yu, and taking the jade tablet, sneeringly said, "I accept the jade tablet, but as for the yuan, that's not necessary. I've said that the Yuan Yang fruit is what I want, just make it the medical fee. The transaction is now complete, we're even." Finished speaking and without hesitation, she turned around to leave Ouyang Manor. Nangong Yu looked at her confident back with his eyes shining brilliantly, then quickly moved his feet to follow her out. Left behind, Ouyang Zhixiong stood alone as he stared at the empty gate, his emotions fluctuating for quite a while before he then turned around, heading back towards his son's room. Heshi had arrived at the Ouyang Manor early in the morning, and now that the treatment was finished, going by the color of the sky, it was already late evening. She was worried about wet Nurse Chen waiting for her with the evening meal, her heart also somewhat anxious. The internal energy within her body fluctuated, stretching like a shadow as she prepared to use Qin Gong to quickly return home. Her figure had barely moved several steps when suddenly, before her eyes, she ran into a wall of flesh. Heshi moaned softly, feeling the tip of her nose ache, while a familiar scent that was clear and cold lingered. Chapter 82, unworthy to associate with the man's deep voice sounded in her ear, "Little thing, am I a bother to you, for you to go so far as to leave without even informing me? How can you destroy the bridge after crossing the river? 1. Heshi clutched her aching nose, her watery eyes looking towards the man blocking her path. "Then if I inform you now, will that do?" Finished speaking, she waved her hand and without expression said, "Nangong Yu, goodbye." Nangong Yu, due to this heartless little guy, gave a mixed angry and happy laugh. Then, grabbing her white wrist that had just waved at him, he pulled her to his chest, and with a faint laugh in his voice said, "If you say goodbye just like that, then how can this king have any face?" At this time, the two of them were standing very close together, Heshi nearly pressed up against Nangong Yu's chest. They were also still in front of the Ouyang family's gate, so the people passing by in West Street were all suddenly watching them as they walked past. Those gazes contained astonishment, curiousness, puzzlement, but even more, contempt. Two men unexpectedly embracing in the middle of the street, this was simply an injury to public morals. They have no sense of shame. Heshi's cheeks blushed, and despite not caring about other people's gazes, she was now somewhat ashamed, desperately struggling to break free from his arm. The more she struggled, the tighter Nangongyu embraced her, ultimately ending with one of his arms around her slender waist, firmly locking her to his chest. "Let go," Heshi said in a fluster. "What do you want?" Nangongyu wasn't the slightest bit concerned about passing people's gazes. Whilst their gazes became more vague, his actions became more intimate, just like she was swearing sovereignty to him. "Tell me, why was your attitude so cold towards me all of a sudden this morning?" Nangongyu lowered his head, gently whispering in her ear, "If you tell me the truth, I'll let you go, Heshi clenched her teeth tightly as she recalled Zhu Kei's arrogant words towards her yesterday, and thinking of the sharp warning, she couldn't help but sneer. "You're the high and mighty, your highness, Hell King, and I'm merely a concubine-born daughter abandoned by the Nalan family. How could I be cold towards you? However, I do not dare to seek a friendship with somebody of a higher social standing. I'm just being respectful and polite, that's all." Nangongyu's hands that were around her waist suddenly tightened, his cold eyes falling on her opening and closing red lips. He really wanted to seal closed this small mouth that spat out words that could make people angered to death. He is the dignified Hell King. For the purpose of winning her over, he had accompanied her to Ouyang Manor, not even hesitating to use his own spiritual power to help her with the treatment. But unexpectedly, what she gave him in exchange was a sentence of, "I do not dare to seek a friendship with somebody of a higher social standing?" As Nangongyu's eyes became colder, Heshi couldn't help but tremble. She remembered that this man had helped her when she was pale and weak, and couldn't help but feel somewhat guilty. But just when she went to say something to make up with him, the sudden sound of crisp bells was heard by her ears. As she turned her head, she saw a luxurious carriage stop in front of them. Pulling the carriage was a fine snow-white horse, its white hair shiny and smooth without a trace of impurities, its eyes clear and bright. Sitting on the carriage was Nangongyu's trusted subordinate, Qing Long. At this moment he was slightly panting, his face looking eager. "Master, young Master Shi, please get on the carriage to continue chatting." His gaze nervously swept all around, his heart extremely glad that his master usually kept a low profile. So although he was famous and outstanding to the general public, only a few people were able to recognize his appearance. Otherwise, the rumor of Hell King is a homosexual, Hell King and a man were intimately embracing each other will spread, causing an uproar. At that time, not just Master's reputation would suffer damage, all the young ladies throughout Jinling infatuated with Master would be driven mad. 1. To abandon one's benefactor upon achieving one's goal. Chapter 83. Indeed, the taste is really good. When Qing Long thought of that horror scene, his whole body felt unwell, so he drove the carriage with the fastest possible speed from Hell King's other courtyard nearby to here. "Only, unruly master, if you don't want to shock the world, please, by all means, don't cause an uproar known to everyone." Nangongyu showed a sarcastic smile as he glanced at the nervous Qing Long, releasing a chilling aura. Heshi, however, coldly said, "No need, I can go back by myself. Then we'll separate here." Finished speaking, she turned around to leave, not even managing 2 steps before she unexpectedly felt a strong force on her waist pull her body straight up into the air. Heshi had no time to cry out in surprise before she was stuffed into the carriage, the door blocked by Nangongyu. The carriage swayed as it moved forward, and after traveling several paces, it suddenly sped up, the speed almost reaching that of a car from her previous life. Heshi's expression was ugly as she glared at Nangongyu. "The mighty Hell King, how can you force a little girl?" Nangongyu leisurely smiled. "Which rules say this king can't force a little girl?" After saying that, he leaned forward slightly, and slowly said, "Moreover, I only forced you." Heshi's heart jumped and she turned her head to avoid his gaze. However, unaware of why, she was filled with an unidentifiable happiness. The corner of Nangong Yu's mouth raised, and taking out several refreshments, he arranged them on a small table, then softly said, "You were busy all of today and haven't eaten yet, right?" Hushi stared blankly, the sweetly rich fragrance of spiritual energy assaulting her nose. Turning her head to look around, she discovered that the outward appearance of this carriage was nothing out of the ordinary, but that the interior decorations were extremely luxurious. The furnishings inside the carriage were all refined using spirit tools, so they carried faint spiritual power fluctuations. The brocade fluttering on the floor was made using 10,000-year-old ice silk, and the small, unremarkable-looking table was made using rare and very old dark sandalwood. The white tea set that Nangong Yu had just arranged, although she was unable to properly tell the quality and materials used, it gave off a refreshing feeling as it hovered over the table. With one look, she was able to tell that it wasn't just an ordinary product. Hushi clicked her tongue whilst examining everything and shook her head. Indeed, this is like that poem, rotten food at a wealthy door, frozen bodies on the floor. Just looking at the items here could make a person jealous. As any item in here was the same, its value far surpassing that of her small courtyard. Nangong Yu had never heard this poem before, but right away he understood the meaning of the poem, leisurely laughing. "What? You dislike this king now?" "No, I just hate the rich." Hushi smiled, before grabbing a pastry and shoving it into her mouth. The sweet fragrance spread between her lips and tongue, and although it couldn't compare with her own cooking, 90% of the pastry's spiritual energy remained. Can be considered as her having eaten this world's best food. Heshi's eyes lit up as she exclaimed, "The taste is really good." Nangong Yu's luminous eyes were glued to her mouth, her pearly white teeth hidden behind soft red lips, just like snow on a red plum flower. His heart that had been silent for many years suddenly began to throb, a burning desire within his body beginning to stir. Suddenly extending his arm, he gently captured Heshi's hand that was still holding half of the pastry, and pulling her towards him, he slightly lowered his head. The pastry that was still held in Heshi's hand entered his mouth, along with one of her fingers which he gently nibbled. Heshi's whole body stiffened, as if it was struck by lightning. Nangong Yu swallowed the pastry, not completely understanding about what tasted good. However, he laughed devilishly. "Indeed, the taste is really good." One poem about the deep disparity between the rich and the poor. While the rich wine and dine, the poor die of cold by the roadside. Chapter 84. Yes, I'm a pervert. Heshi felt uncomfortable all over, her lips parted halfway as they slightly trembled. Yet, she was unable to say a word for a long time. The fire in Nangong Yu's eyes became more passionate, causing his body to move forward, and grabbing her wrist, he pulled her even closer. As he leant his body over hers, he kissed those slightly parted red lips. WTF? What is this man doing? Hushi suddenly came to her senses and struggled to break free with all her might. However, Nangong Yu effortlessly pressed down on her nape, rendering her unable to escape. A burst of strong wind erupted from Nangong Yu's palm, causing the small table that was originally standing between them to now be pushed away. There was now no longer any barrier between the two of them. Invisible needles appeared in Heshi's palm, and just when she was about to launch them, her hands were suddenly restrained behind her back, the invisible needles quietly falling to the floor. Nangong Yu picked her up and placed her on his lap, then lowered his head and started kissing her again. This time it wasn't a light kiss, like a dragonfly gently skimming the water. Instead, it was like a stormy sea, the heat and aggression slowly trying to engulf her. Hushi felt as if she was melting, every cell in her body burning. Her mind was so muddled that she couldn't think clearly, and she didn't have the slightest ounce of power to strike back. Then, after a good while, when Heshi was close to suffocating, only then did Nangong Yu release her. His usually clear and melodious voice now hoarse and low, full of passion. "It tastes really good, and very sweet." Hushi all of a sudden sobered and raised her hand to slap Nangong Yu. "You pervert, bastard, asshole." Hushi was so angry her whole body was trembling. Never before had a man been so daring towards her like this. This man had unexpectedly dared to disrespect her, snatching away her first kiss. He could just be damned to die 1,000 times, 10,000 times. However, Hushi was unaware that her voice wasn't cold and stern, like it usually was when she was disguised as a man. Instead, it was delicate and soft. If people heard it, it would sound like a spoiled child acting coquettishly. Nangongyu held back her hand that wanted to slap him, and confined her in his arms while laughing lightly. I am a pervert. Although he had never heard the word pervert before, it was very easy to understand its meaning, wasn't it? Finished speaking, the smiling expression in his eyes intensified, and bowing his head, he lightly pecked the side of the girl's red and somewhat swollen lips. However, I'm only doing this with you. For a moment, Hushi felt bewildered. She was extremely angry, itching to slaughter this man. Yet, besides the anger consuming her, she could feel a warmth spreading from the bottom of her heart that she herself failed to understand. Hushi had never experienced such feelings before in the 19 years that she had lived. Furthermore, she had never been so flustered or weak. "Ooh, you shameless bastard. Let me go." Hushi struggled firmly, wanting to push Nangongyu away. But in regards to her resistance, how could Nangongyu care about it? Effortlessly confining her in his arms, he lowered his head, then leaning close to her flushed earlobe, he whispered, "I am shameless, but recently you obviously like that, isn't that right?" At first, he had only wanted to scare this emotionless little girl without a conscience. Yet when her soft lips had touched his, he suddenly felt heat rise within his body like a wave, causing him to lose all reason and become unable to suppress his desires. He couldn't help but want to devour this girl, to mark her with his scent, making her completely his. Nangongyu had lived for 20 years and never experienced this kind of feeling before. Furthermore, he had never felt such an intense desire towards any girl in the past. From this moment on, he completely regarded Hushi as belonging to him. He would never allow others to covet her, nor would he allow her to escape. Chapter 85. I'll kiss you until you like it. Hushi felt agitated, causing her heart to pound, her face unyielding. Who likes it? Disgusting. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her hand and wiped her kiss-swollen red lips. The next moment, she felt the air around her suddenly become dark and violent, as if a whirlpool was forming, preparing to swallow her. Nangongyu's face was overcast yet calm and collected as one hand hooked her nape, his frosty eyes staring at her. "You said, disgusting?" When Hushi looked at the expression on Nangongyu's face, she instantly wanted to retreat, her face turning pale. Of course she felt guilty, it was like she wasn't clear and had made him misunderstand. But he was the one who did the wrong thing first, breaching her heart so her attitude wouldn't be so cold towards him. However, just as Hushi moved to retreat, Nangongyu reacted first. He abruptly pressed her body closer to his, one hand holding her nape as the other hand tightly wrapped around her slender waist. Once she was firmly confined in his arms, he lowered his head, seizing her small mouth and kissing her once again. The kiss this time was more frantic than the first, as aggressive as if he was trying to devour her soul. Hushi was firmly captured in Nangongyu's arms. Her body felt like it had become liquid, so she had no other choice but be forced to accept his passionate kiss. When the kiss ended, she only had enough strength left to gasp for breath, her pink and tender cheeks turning red like a ripe apple. Nangongyu gently stroked her cheeks, feeling their satiny warmth, and with a husky voice lightly laughed, "Little thing, your mouth says no yet your heart says yes, but even then, you still dare to say you don't like it?" Hushi gnashed her teeth as she raised her head to glare at him. "You?" Without waiting for her to rage and curse, Nangongyu laughingly said, "If you still dare to say it's disgusting, I wouldn't mind kissing you until you like it. Shier, you want to try it?" Hushi, who had been on the verge of rage, held it back. Her anger creasing her long and shapely eyebrows, making her beautiful small face turn grim. Nangongyu couldn't help but laugh when he saw her angry kitten-like appearance, his expression full of affection and happiness as he looked at her. "Shier, how can you look so adorable? You're adorable. Your whole family is adorable." Hushi gnashed her teeth once again, and quickly retreating, she escaped from Nangongyu's arms. Her left hand secretly raising the curtain as she considered jumping from the window. But as a result, Nangong Yu's next words made her obediently sit back down. You don't want to know how to use the yuan yang fruit? Nangong Yu spoke casually, but the listening Heshi was seething with anger, itching to beat his annoying laughing face into a pig head. Good. Very good. You hold the information that I need, and a hero doesn't suffer from one loss. So, I admit defeat this time. Life had its ups and downs. She didn't believe that after she was able to cultivate, that Nangong Yu would still have ways to threaten her. At that time, she would let him know why the flowers were so red. Heshi took a deep breath, then another. It was only after taking that second deep breath was she able to push down the resentment in her heart, placing a fake smile upon her face. In that case, may I ask Hell King Nangong Yu to tell me how to use the yuan yang fruit? The tips of Nangong Yu's eyebrows and the corners of his eyes rose as he smiled. He thought that the girl before him was cunning yet adorable, especially due to the pain her wrist must in from when he had grabbed her before. Her appearance was of one wanting to resist rubbing it but being unable to, and that made him itch to take her into his arms again, firmly rubbing and pinching her. Nangong Yu laughed, and only when he saw that Heshi was getting angry again did he stop, saying in a serious voice, Yuan yang fruit will work more effectively if you use it directly, rather than refining it into a medicinal pill. The only condition is that your body needs to resist the yang attribute of the yuan yang fruit. Otherwise, your body will explode, but, unfortunately, it's the only way. Chapter 86. Do you believe me? The corners of Heshi's mouth puckered as she fiercely said, So, what should I do to be able to resist the yuan yang fruit's yang nature? Nangong Yu coughed before slightly smiling. In order to neutralize the yang in the yuan yang fruit, you must use the coldest in object, the yuan yang fruit's counterpart. This way, it will help guide the yuan yang fruit's heat straight to your dantian, but cooling it enough so that it won't be more than your body could bear. Heshi frowned. Then what's the coldest in object? Nangong Yu again smiled slightly. Take out the yuan yang fruit first? Heshi glanced at him suspiciously, but without pause, she still withdrew the jade box containing the 2 yuan yang fruit from her space. The one sitting in front of her was the great Hell King. An insignificant 5th-rank yuan yang fruit was nothing in his eyes. Nangong Yu saw that she had no hesitation when she brought out the yuan yang fruit, and the dazzling radiance in his eyes shone brightly. Taking the jade box, he gently opened the cover, and a blazing heat burst forth. But as if it was nothing, his slender fingers gently stretched, grabbing one of the yuan yang fruit. The next moment, the yuan yang fruit in his hand disappeared before Heshi's eyes. Nangong Yu had just clearly deposited it into his storage space. Heshi blinked, momentarily not understanding what it was that Nangong Yu was doing. Nangong Yu's eyes deeply looked at Heshi, but instead of explaining to her, he gently reached out his hand to tuck her disordered hair behind ear, then slowly said, I'll take this yuan yang fruit as a reward. In a month, I will bring you the coldest in object. After that, you will be able to remove the seal on your dantian and become a cultivator. Heshi stared blankly, almost blurting out the question of why he was helping her to this extent. In regards to him taking a yuan yang fruit as a reward, she didn't mind, as it should be his. However, Nangong Yu's burning gaze made her voice sluggish, so no matter how hard she tried, her voice wouldn't come out. At this moment he lowered his head, his warm breathing fanning her slightly open red lips, his voice intimate. She do you believe me? Heshi's body froze as if by a spell, her mind like paste. Though even when she couldn't react, she still subconsciously nodded. That's right, she believed Nangong Yu. She believed this stranger, this mysterious man, who has given her a lot of help. Despite there being no reason, she was convinced that whatever Nangong Yu promised, he will certainly accomplish. The carriage soon arrived at a desolate area and stopped, not far away from her courtyard. Heshi gracefully jumped off the carriage, waved her hand towards Nangong Yu, then turned around and hurriedly left. Although the night air was cold, it was unable to disperse the warmth on her face. Her heart still pounding incessantly. Nangong Yu lifted the curtain and watched as Heshi's back traveled further away, a complicated light flashing in his eyes. Outside the carriage, Qin Long's brows wrinkled. As he stared in the direction Hashi left, a touch of anxiousness swept past his eyes. In 1 month's time, wasn't that Master's once-a-year seclusion, period? Master, what does he think he's doing? As a thought came to his mind, Qin Long's complexion became extremely unsightly, his eyes revealing a slight killing intent. He would not let anybody off who endangered the safety of his master. Closed-door training, also called closed-door meditation or closed-door cultivation. Chapter 87, Nangong Yu's mind after returning. In the meeting hall of the Hell King's brightly lit manor, several subordinates were reporting a lack of progress to their master. Those are the current circumstances regarding Metal Qilin. Bai, who has been reporting for half a day already, yet once he raised his head, he saw his normally cold-hearted master looking somewhat absent-minded. Although the expression on his face was still indifferent, those beautiful star-like eyes were gleaming brightly, as if he was thinking of something interesting. Bai Hu's chin almost hit the floor. They all knew that although their master was only 20 years old, his face was usually set in a demonic sneer. His deep eyes similar to a calm ancient well, as if in this world, simply no one or anything was able to arouse his interest. Usually during the daily report, Master would only need to listen to the beginning, straight away knowing the rest without have to hear it. So without having to wait for them to finish their report, he's able to give them accurate instructions on what to do. But today, Master was actually absent-minded. Bai Hu had finished his report and Master's orders still couldn't be heard. This was simply too unimaginable. What was Master thinking of? Bai Hu was uncertain, and he couldn't help but secretly cast a glance towards Master's slightly pursed lips. That spot of light peach color on his lower lip, it seemed to look like bite marks. Bai Hu's heart palpitated. Master is on the nascent soul stage. With his spiritual power, he would be able to heal this minor cut. But now Master had kept the wound. In the end, who caused it? He vaguely cast a glance towards Qin Long, who was standing behind Master like an invisible person, asking with his eyes, "What happened with Master today?" Qin Long's expression was cold, a trace of confusion and anger visible in his eyes. Just when Bai Hu was becoming extremely confused, Nangong Yu finally came back from his thoughts to see Bai Hu's confused expression and darting gaze. So he couldn't help but faintly say, "I already understand the circumstances regarding Metal Qilin. Since the situation is now unusual, you can command them to train for the time being. If something happens, then let Wu Xian handle it." "Yes, Master." Bai Hu quickly focused his thoughts and respectfully said, "This subordinate will notify Wu Xian. If there is nothing else, you can all withdraw." Nangong Yu said with a wave of his hand. They quickly answered, and under Bai Hu's lead, they quietly withdrew from the hall, Qin Long following as he was also ordered to leave. Nangong Yu sat alone in the large hall, and as his hand reached out to lightly touch the small cut on his lower lip, the corner of his mouth lifted into a light smile. What is that little thing doing now? Were there any thoughts of him? Before Nangong Yu's eyes, an elegant and beautiful image slowly appeared. Obviously it's a teenage girl, yet even though she was disguised as a man, there wasn't the slightest flaw in her disguise. Even Ouyang Zhixiong, one of the top experts in the country, was unable to see through her disguise. If he hadn't recognized that pair of purple eyes earlier, perhaps even he would be unable to imagine that the elegant as a pearl Shiyu, the genius Dr. Shi, and Nalan family's abandoned and ugly concubine-born daughter, Nalan Hashi, were unexpectedly the same person. In his mind, the actions of the two people in the carriage flashed past. The little girl's dainty body was soft and emitted a nice fragrance, her lips more delicate than a flower petal. These scenes replayed over and over in his mind, causing him to feel agitated and his body to feel burning hot. Never before had a person so affected his emotions like this little girl did, making him long to possess her, eager to be able to see her every frown and smile. Chapter 88, Two-Faced It Was Fate. From the first moment he saw the radiance in her eyes when she opened them in Gluttonous House, his heart was drawn, unable to break free. But so what if he couldn't break free? If he, Nangong Yu, wanted something, there wasn't anything he couldn't obtain. Just at this moment, the guard's voice from outside the door lightly reported, "Master, Zhu Ke requests to see you." Soon after, a beautiful woman dressed in red walked into the hall, then kneeled towards Nan Gongyu in greeting. Her movements were as elegant as moving clouds. Without losing any of her outstanding beauty, when she kneeled, her chest and abdomen were still slightly upright, completely exposing the pretty curves of her body. Nan Gongyu said, "Rise. The girl that I ordered you to examine, how was the condition of her injury?" Zhu Ke slowly stood up, her face frosty and eyebrows slightly wrinkled. Contempt flashed in her eyes but quickly vanished without a trace, while on the surface she was still respectful as she replied, answering, "Master, Miss Nayland was only superficially wounded, it's not serious." After Zhu Ke had returned, she discovered that the person who lived in that remote courtyard, where no spiritual energy existed, was unexpectedly Nayland Manor's concubine born 3rd Mississippi. Moreover, she was the trash who had long been abandoned by Nayland Manor. Not mentioning an insignificant place like Nayland Manor, but just basing it off her physical condition as trash and her low-born birth, the people in Hell King's Manor simply wouldn't even bother to pay attention to her. Yet she still dared to seduce Master. She could be damned. Nan Gongyu nodded. He had used his spiritual power to examine her, so of course he knew her body didn't have any problems. Only, thinking of those criss-crossing scars, a trace of chilliness swept across his heart. The scars on her body will be able to heal? Zhu Ke dropped her gaze to hide her mood, while her hands hanging at her side were tightly clenched. Using a mocking tone to refer to herself, she said, "Master, this subordinate is a 5th-rank doctor, yet it's still impossible for me to treat insignificant scars. How can I even have the qualifications to serve Master?" After hearing no response, she secretly lifted her eyes to see a smile that wasn't a smile on Nan Gongyu's face. She couldn't help but bite her lip, then, appearing like it was accidental, said, "Because Miss Nayland's injury was only caused by an ordinary object, it didn't injure the texture of her skin. So, this subordinate originally planned to give her a bottle of 2nd-rank pure jade dew pills as it would be enough. Although this medicine's effect is ordinary, so the time to completely recover would be longer, it would benefit an ordinary person like Miss Nayland due to the nature of the medicine, which is that of alleviating pain. But who knows? Who knows?" Zhu Ke once again glanced at Nan Gongyu, and seeing him restrain his smile, with his brows slightly wrinkled, she happily continued, "Miss Nayland probably knew that this subordinate is a 5th-rank doctor, so she wanted a portion of every type of medicinal pill. But those medicinal pills are all for 3rd rank and higher. For an ordinary person to take those medicines will cause their body to explode. This subordinate painstakingly tried to persuade her for a long time, yet Miss Nayland not only didn't listen, she said, she is a person whom Master regards as important, while this subordinate was only a slave. What could this subordinate do, other than do what she was told? This subordinate is really incapable. I could only give her a portion of every type of medicinal pill." Nan Gongyu slightly smirked, neither reprimanding or appeasing her, only asking one thing, "Oh, is that so?" Zhu Ke was frightened by her master's meaningful gaze, as if he could see into her heart. Having no other choice but to restrain her guilt and fear, she nodded. Nan Gongyu suddenly spoke with a deep voice, "But I remember ordering you to bring the 4th-rank jade muscle pill. Zhu Ke, are you outwardly agreeing to what I say, yet secretly opposing my orders?" This subordinate doesn't dare. Zhu Ke was so frightened, her whole body was trembling as she fell to her knees. Chapter 89, by whose gossip Zhu Ke was so frightened that her whole body trembled, her knees thumping to the floor as she fell to kneel. This subordinate examined Miss Nayland's body and found that she is just an ordinary person without a cultivation base. The jade muscle pill is a 4th-rank medicinal pill. It's really harmful to Miss Nayland. So, without permission, I decided to exchange it with pure jade dew pills which only have a mild effect. Yet afterwards, Miss Nayland demanded that this subordinate also give her the jade muscle pill, begging Master to clearly distinguish this. Nan Gongyu lightly said, "I just casually asked, you don't have to be so nervous." Suddenly, he pointed to her face and asked, "What happened to your face?" Zhu Kei touched her left cheek, ashamed, resentment flashing in her eyes. Zhu Kei posed as a beauty. No one in Hell King's manor could be compared to her. Added with her excellent medical skills and decent cultivation base, Master has always thought highly of her. Apart from herself, there has been no other woman who could get close to Master. But now, that immature ugly girl had dared to injure her cherished face, causing the hatred in her heart to rise in turbulent waves. At this time, sloping scratches extended from her temple to her cheek on the left half of her face, and although the scar wasn't long, it was a faint grayish color. As long as a person with discerning eyes looked at her face, they could easily spot it. The appearance Zhu Kei had cherished the most was now like heart-piercing torment to her. Yesterday, she didn't immediately treat the wound, so now it's become like this. Zhu Kei lowered her eyes, her face showing a humiliated and flustered expression, and with a low voice said, "Miss Naylan," when she demanded more than 10 types of precious medicinal pills from this subordinate originally refused, but who knew that she would suddenly throw a strange silver needle. At the time, this subordinate was not aware. However, Master, please don't blame Miss Naylan. She is also worried the scars on her body will remain, so momentarily anxious, this subordinate was too careless. This subordinate is obviously a cultivator of gold core stage, yet still managed to be injured by an ordinary person's hands. Zhu Kei lifted her head, concealed the radiance in her eyes, and with an enduring and humiliated expression, she looked at Nangongyu. She just couldn't believe that Master would be seduced by such a greedy and vain woman. But who knew what Nangongyu was thinking as he just casually smiled, his pitch-black eyes like calm ancient wells, not revealing a trace of his emotions. An incense stick of time later, Zhu Kei left the hall, her face livid. She touched the wound that was still faintly painful and itchy, her heart full of hatred. She had exposed all of Naylan Hishi's wicked conduct to Master, yet, unexpectedly, Master didn't say anything, only waving his hand for her to withdraw. Could it be that Master truly liked that smelly girl? Zhu Kei gnashed her teeth while thinking, and Bai Hu, coming from the opposite direction, saw her ashen complexion and the scar on her face. He couldn't help but be surprised as he asked, "What happened to you? How come your complexion is so unsightly? Did Master reprimand you? Furthermore, why does a scar still remain on your face? Aren't you a grand 5th-rank doctor? Such a little wound, yet you still can't treat it?" Zhu Kei's complexion immediately became gloomier, coldly saying, "You don't need to be so meddlesome, manage yourself instead." Bai Hu shrugged, it isn't good to provoke a woman over her appearance. Rather, recalling what he had just seen in the hall, he couldn't help but gossip with Zhu Kei. "Hey, Zhu Kei, you haven't found Master abnormal today, have you? He went out early this morning, bringing Qing Long with him, and not returning until the sun set in the west." The expression on his face when he returned was as fresh as a spring breeze. When I reported to Master, it was the first time I'd ever seen him absent-minded. Zhu Kei's heart grew cold. She couldn't help but hesitate as she asked, "Do you know whom Master met today?" Chapter 90. Zhu Kei's ruined appearance. By whose mouth twitched. The whereabouts of Master isn't something we subordinates can guess about as we wish. However, to gossip once in a while is still possible. His eyes brightened and he couldn't help but say, "Although, did you see that on Master's mouth there was a small cut?" After Zhu Kei heard this, an image suddenly appeared before her eyes showing that obvious cut on Master's lower lip. Tightly clenching her hands, her fingernails almost embedded themselves in her palms. Bai Hu was full of interest as he lowered his voice, excitedly continuing to gossip, "In my opinion, that cut is absolutely caused by being bitten. Master certainly didn't bite himself, and with Master's strength now, if it's not that he voluntarily let them, then no one would be able to. You understand what I mean, right? I feel that the Master of these days is so unusual, this must be the sprouting of a spring heart. In other words, Master has reached that age after all." "Shut up, Master's affairs aren't for a slave like you to recklessly start a rumor about." Zhu Kei suddenly shouted, shocking Bai Hu so much he jumped. Bai Hu noticed that her beautiful and cold appearance had completely become distorted, her body trembling, her eyes reflecting her rage. Master has such a heavenly appearance, how can common folk match up to him? If you dare babble nonsense again, don't blame me for being impolite to you. Finished speaking, she furiously turned away. Leaving Bai Hu standing alone with a face full of bewilderment, he blankly stared after her for half a day before saying in confusion, "What happened? Wasn't this only a joke? Even Master doesn't mind, but why was Zhu Kei so unreasonable, like her tail was being stepped on?" Zhu Kei angrily returned to her room, shutting the door with a bang. The rage in her heart couldn't be calmed, so she grabbed a porcelain bottle beside the door and fiercely threw it. In this world, no one is worthy enough for such a stunning master, especially that trash Nailin Heshi. Someone like her isn't even good enough to carry Master's shoes. Zhu Kei's eyes abruptly became very fierce. If she really intended to seduce Master and block Master's road, then she would absolutely not allow that slut to live. One by one, the sounds of shattering porcelain echoed in the room, before finally, it helped calm Zhu Kei down. Sitting down in front of her dressing table, she withdrew 2 jade muscle pills that she had refined herself. One she used orally, and the other was dissolved into a liquid, which she then gently applied on her face. She only needed a quarter of an hour and her face would be restored to its original smooth and beautiful complexion. Zhu Kei sat anxiously in front of the glass mirror, looking at her own cold and elegant facial features. Time passed, minute by minute, her eyes staring at the scar on her face so long she was nearly getting double vision. However, a quarter of an hour passed, half an hour passed, an hour passed, yet the scar on her face didn't have the slightest sign of recovery. Moreover, it was originally just a faint grayish color, but now, it had turned a thick gray-black color. And the most frightening part is that before it was only slightly itchy, now it had become painful and severely itchy. In the mirror, that thin scar had spread in the blink of an eye. Although there was no decay, it was as if it had been rubbed, the skin around the scar appearing bumpy and uneven with deep wrinkles. In such a short time, that originally thin and small scar had suddenly become extremely obvious, as if a small centipede had run across Zhu Kei's soft and white face, leaving a very horrible and disgusting mark. My face. My face. Zhu Kei's eyes widened as she stared at the gray-black scar on her reflection in the mirror. Her face twisted and frightening, she issued a miserable scream. Chapter 91. Organizing her space at this time, the Heshi that was being hated and cursed by Zhu Kei had long forgot about this woman. Although she was unable to remove the seal, she was still busy rushing back and forth every day. First off, it was to experiment by planting spiritual herbs in her space. In order to become familiar with the spiritual herbs' medicinal properties and growth characteristics, Heshi had ordered Mo-san and the others to collect all kinds of basic lists on spiritual herbs from outside. These lists were mainly composed of commonly seen spiritual herbs, spiritual insects, spiritual beasts, and medicinal pills found in the Mi-Luo continent. They didn't have detailed prescriptions and attributes, only rough explanations, some even had physical descriptions. For a common doctor in this world they were just like entry-level encyclopedias without any real use, but for Heshi, they were a big help. Relying on her own large sum of money to last, Heshi brought the spiritual medicine lists, some spiritual herb seeds to be planted in her space, and didn't return. The ancient rhyme spiritual field in her space is able to shorten a plant's growth period 100 times. Just seeing the planted seeds begin to sprout a glossy green color and emit fresh spiritual energy made Dan so happy. Mother, there's so many types of herbs that the air in Shumi Palace has become good enough to eat. Dan wants more herbs. Mother, plant a little extra, okay? Heshi lazily stretched her body, and after drinking a mouthful of spring water from the spiritual spring, sighed, and unhappily said, I've been so busy these past several days and with difficulty have finally managed to plant so many hectares. You must really think of me as an old farming ox. Wah, but Dan needs a lot of spiritual energy to be able to come out and meet Mother. Dan really wants to see Mother and help Mother beat bad people, He was most afraid of Dan Dan when it began to act cute, like a spoiled child, so heaving a sigh she said, okay, but these spiritual herbs have just started to sprout, wait until they mature, then they'll release a richer spiritual energy. At that time, apart from what I need for my medicine, the remaining spiritual herbs will all be given to you to eat. That's pretty good, right? Once He had managed to console Dan Dan, he finally stopped disturbing her. So after resting for a while, she continued to plant in a few areas. Looking at the field in her space, that was at this moment verdant and lush, He's face showed a smile. Apart from those areas of spiritual herbs, He had also planted a range of edible spiritual fruits and spiritual vegetables. These spiritual fruits and vegetables didn't have any special attributes, and they also didn't contain much spiritual energy, but as for taste, they were easily the most delicious. Because the time in her space didn't follow reason, the crops she had planted were already nearing maturity and she would be able to harvest them that night. But when her eyes fell on the vast expanse of empty black soil, She felt frustrated. The amount of spiritual herbs she had managed to plant today just weren't enough. The fact is that after she feeds them to Dan Dan, there wouldn't be a single remaining spiritual plant left in the ancient rhyme spiritual field. But how could the blame be all hers? Doesn't farming require proper time and effort? How could she manage to finish sowing such a large area by herself? Not to mention, later she would have to harvest everything that had reached maturity, and then prepare the soil so that she could plant more crops. Just thinking about all that work made her head feel like it could explode. In the future, if she could find a hard-working, loyal, and capable person able to help with the farming, that would be nice. She had barely withdrawn from her space and opened her eyes when she saw Xiaoli enter the room, staggering as she carried a large basin filled with hot water. This little girl was still young, only 10 years old, but coupled with possible long-term malnutrition, it had left her looking thin and small, giving her the appearance of a 7- or 8-year-old child. Chapter 92, Very delicious at this time. Xiaoli walked in while carrying a wash basin that appeared like it was more than half her size. He quickly grabbed the basin, and removing a package of pastries from her space, she passed it to Xiaoli, only saying, "Eat it." These days, He had often been making food in her space. With the large supply of food ingredients and seasonings available to her, she was able to make many different kinds of foods. Unfortunately, due to the existence of Dan Dan, that big stomach, no matter how much food she made, it was all devoured. Being able to bring food out from her space was very rare, and she had only managed it this time as she had done it secretly, withdrawing this package of pastries while Dan Dan was distracted. Xiaoli was flattered as she looked at He, yet she was unsure of what to do with the pastries she held in her hands. "Miss, such a good dessert must be expensive, right? You really want to give these to me to eat?" Even though the package containing the pastries was unopened, Xiaoli could smell their rich fragrance and sense a refreshing spiritual energy inside. Such a high-quality dessert like this would be sold in the intoxicated immortal restaurant. Even if Xiaoli worked for a lifetime, she still wouldn't be able to afford it, right? He frowned. "If I let you eat it, then just eat it. Why so much nonsense?" Seeing that Xiaoli still looked fearful, her small face full of longing as she strongly endured her hunger, He couldn't help but shake her head. "I made these myself. In the future, no matter how many you want to eat, I'll be able to give them to you. Since you follow me, as long as you're well-behaved and obedient, I naturally guarantee that you won't have to worry about your clothes and food." "Ah." Xiaoli's mouth opened in surprise as she stared at He with eyes full of reverence. "Miss, you're a doctor with brilliant medical skills. Yet you're actually able to cook spiritual food too. You're simply too awesome. That Xiaoli and brother are able to follow you, we're really blessed." After saying this, Xiaoli carefully opened the wrapping and reverently picked up a delicately shaped peach blossom cake, slowly placing it in her mouth. The peach blossom's fragrance mixed with the sweetness of the pastry as it melted in her mouth, while the rich spiritual energy that touched her tongue was absorbed into her body, leaving her with a feeling of relaxation. Xiaoli's eyes opened wide as she stared blankly with shock. As she chewed the pastry in her mouth with all her might, It was almost like she was itching to swallow her own tongue to savor every crumb. So delicious, it was really delicious. In this lifetime, she had never eaten such delicious food before. Even when her brother had once secretly brought her to their employer's house to eat expensive spiritual fruit, that fruit hadn't had 1/10 of the deliciousness contained in this cake. As soon as she returned to her senses, she realized that only 2 red bean cakes remained in the bag that she held in her hands, yet she still wanted to continue eating. Xiao Li's face flushed with shame, her voice filled with panic and anxiousness as she spoke. "Miss, I didn't mean to eat so many, but they were really delicious. You should punish me." "Calm down, it's only a few pieces of pastry." When Hushi saw the little girl's regretful crying expression, it touched her heart, causing the corner of her mouth to subconsciously rise. "You stuffed your stomach with all those cakes, but there'll be more delicious foods later and it'll be your loss as you'll be too full to eat more." At this time, Hushi remembered that she couldn't always spend all her time cooking in her space. It wasn't just Dan, the big stomach king who devoured everything she made to look after. There was also wet Nurse Chin. Her body was so weak, and having been nursed back to health after not being able to treat the illness for so long, it now appeared that rather than medicine to help her recuperate, it would be better to use healthy food. Of course, if Hushi could take advantage of this situation to teach wet Nurse Chen how to cook, in the future everyone's meals would improve, while allowing for her to be lazy and cook less. In regards to wet Nurse Chen's recovery, just as Hushi expected, the healthy food was very beneficial. After eating it for more than a week, wet Nurse Chen's originally weak and unsightly complexion became rosy, while the impurities in her meridians also started to clear up. Chapter 93, Large amount of perfect supplement soup. In addition to wet Nurse Chen, Hushi also gave Shi Jia and the others a perfect supplement soup to use in conjunction with a detailed training program to build up their strength. The basic training that Shi Jia and the others were now following was very intense. Every day they got up at Mao Sherwan, and weren't able to rest until Yushir 2 in the evening. Hushi was teaching them the Special Forces basic training methods from her previous life. These training methods seemed simple at first glance, but in fact, they would cause the body to reach its limits time and time again, so that on a battlefield of death they would fight to live. In this way, step by step, their physical strength slowly became stronger. So every night, after they finished training, they were each served a bowl of the perfect supplement soup. It was the final step to help refine their bodies, a support to strengthen and stabilize the training. It is reasonable to say that Shi Jia and the others' training was very bitter, but they not only hadn't complained, instead they were full of anticipation every day. Every evening after training, their eyes as they looked at Hushi were shining, brimming with reverence and gratitude. In the spacious dining room, Shi Jia gulped down the last of the huge amount of prepared supplement soup. Still not completely full, he licked the bowl clean of soup, then reluctantly put down the big bowl. Beside him, Shi Yi's actions were almost the same, and in the end he couldn't help but sigh. Young master's cooking skills are really amazing. Such a delicious soup, even if he were to make me drink it for a lifetime, I would still be willing. Shi Jia sneered at him. "Do you think this soup is just delicious? If it was only delicious, it wouldn't be young master personally cooking it. Don't tell me that all of you haven't discovered it yet, that since we've been drinking this soup our body's conditions have improved. Every day they become better, with our strength also advancing and experiencing changes. I dare say that after half a month, I wouldn't have any fear even if I fought with a 9th-rank martial artist of the Qi refining stage." "That's right." Shi Bing, sitting across the table, excitedly exclaimed, "Young master is really too amazing. How can the spiritual energy in the food be so rich, the effect so miraculous, and even the taste be so good?" True, although young master has instructed wet Nurse Chen and Miss Xiaoli on how to prepare the food, the taste of their food can't be compared with young master's. Moreover, have you all heard young master's words? Now that our training is underway, and only the most basic training at that, as long as we can pass the stage, he will teach us far more powerful skills in the future. Once we've learnt these special skills, even if we were to meet with a foundation establishment stage martial artist, we wouldn't need to have the slightest amount of fear. Shi Yi's hands tightly clenched into fists, his eyes slightly red. Previously we were kept in cages to be sold and were ignored by people. Who would have ever thought that there will be such a day like this? Which young master resembles ours, buying slaves not to flog, beat, or curse at them, and instead raising them with delicious food. The 10 people were talking spiritedly and thinking of their master now. Their eyes were full of sincere admiration usually seen when worshipping an idol. Shi Jia looked at the 9 brothers who had trained together these past few days, his smile suddenly vanishing, his face solemn as he said, "Young master has given us a new lease on life. If it hadn't for him, we would have always been the slaves that were looked down upon by people. Brothers, we must pass this training so that in the future we can repay young master." In the dining room, a combined shout of "all right" echoed as it sounded. Xiao Li, carrying a small plate of fruits, smiled as she looked at this scene. However, she couldn't help but remember the youth on a long journey. "Brother, when will you be able to finish avenging our hatred and return? If you don't return soon, Miss Most Trusted Servant position will be taken away." 1. Mao sure 5 to 7 a.m. You sure 5 to 7 p.m. Chapter 94. Magical hands that can revive the dying. While Xiao Li, Shi Jia, and the others were thinking about Heshi, she had at this time left the remote suburbs to come to the bustling Yanjing city, arriving at General Ouyang's manor. This time Ouyang Haoshuan wasn't lying in the bed, but instead sitting in a rattan chair in the courtyard. It was now already the 3rd time that Heshi had come to treat Ouyang Haoshuan, the thin silver needles penetrating into several of his acupuncture points. As Ouyang Zhixiong quickly stepped forward, he started transferring some of his spiritual power to his son's body. The silver needles inserted into Ouyang Haoshuan's body shook slightly, as if there was an invisible hand shaking them. Yet unlike with the previous times, this time was different as there was now no longer any thick black liquid seeping out. "Done," Heshi lightly uttered, her face showing a satisfactory smile. The youth's skin was as fine as white porcelain, almost transparent under the sunshine. When a shallow laugh sounded, the youth's whole person was surrounded by a faint golden light, the beauty stunning and dazzling people. As Ouyang Haoshuan reclined on the rattan chair, he momentarily felt stunned, his heart feeling as if it was grabbed by something. With a ticklish, heavy pressure in his chest, his breathing started to unconsciously speed up. Ouyang Zhixiong was pleasantly surprised as he looked at Heshi. "Genius, Dr. Shi. Today we didn't see any poison seep out. Does that mean that Haoshuan is already completely recovered?" Heshi nodded her head, and after returning the silver needles to her space, she then sat down beside Ouyang Haoshuan. Her voice was as ice-cold as her jade-like slender fingers as they grabbed Ouyang Haoshuan's wrist, gently pressing down on his veins. His wrist sensed the cool touch of those soft and slender fingers, more exquisite than mutton-fat white jade. Ouyang Haoshuan suddenly felt his whole body tense, and feeling like the hand on his wrist was actually pressed against his heart caused him to be unable to suppress the shudder that shook his body. Heshi glanced at him strangely before she then withdrew her hand, saying, "The poison in young Master Ouyang's body has been completely removed, his broken tendons repaired, and his dantian is now able to once again accumulate spiritual power. Unfortunately, due to the fact that young Master's body has been declining for more than a year, his body is now extremely weak. Not just his body though, his meridians are also very fragile, so young Master Ouyang's body needs some time to exercise and recover completely." Ouyang Zhixiong nodded repeatedly, and looking at Ouyang Haoshuan reclining on the rattan chair, he could feel his eyes start to redden. His son had been lying on the bed for over a year, and with a pale complexion and an unshaven beard, the whole image he had portrayed was one of an abandoned beggar, completely dejected. Yet now, although Ouyang Haoshuan's body was still weak, he had regained his refined and proud demeanor, and with his eyes clear, his whole person now resembled a brilliant pearl. It seemed that compared to his previous disposition, the him of today was far more imposing. This is all thanks to Shi Yu, the genius Dr. Shi with the magical hands capable of reviving a dying person with a miraculous method. Ouyang Zhixiong repeatedly thanked her, and ordering his people to carry out a large chest of crystal stones, he insisted that Heshi accept it. Heshi was raising a small pet that loved to eat crystal stones, so of course she was extremely short on funds. Since General Ouyang was so enthusiastic to give them, she certainly wouldn't argue with him and refuse. Yet it was now only proper to return politeness for politeness, so Heshi treated Ouyang Haoshuan's body extra carefully. Not only did she leave a lot medical pills for Ouyang Haoshuan to take to restore his meridians, she also wrote out a detailed recuperation program to help return him to peak physical condition. Of course, those medical pills were something she had learnt to make in her previous life using a refining method unknown in Mi-Luo continent. After all, she couldn't use spiritual power, so of course she wouldn't be able to refine pills by controlling fire. Ouyang Zhixiong's mind was finally at peace after Heshi had accepted the remuneration, but he couldn't help but think that the black poison had almost completely eroded his son's body, making it near impossible for him to ever fully recover. Chapter 95, Devouring Spirit, Genius Dr. Shi, do you know what kind of poison was in Haoshuan's body? Heshi's movements slightly paused and she was silent momentarily before finally saying, the poison found in young Master Ouyang's body was devouring spirit. This poison is extremely rare in Jinling country, it's colorless and tasteless, so it's very difficult to detect this poison in an ordinary martial artist. Once this poison is administered, it nourishes itself on the body's spiritual power, rapidly spreading throughout the entire body. For people infected with this poison, the meridians will rot inch by inch, while the dantian will gradually wither until all that remains of the person is a layer of skin. Only then will they stop breathing. During this process, the person will feel like they're slowly being devoured by 1,000 ants, in such unbearable agony that they would wish for death. An ordinary person would absolutely be unable to endure it. When saying these words, Heshi's face had slightly blushed. This was because she wasn't able to find out any information about the devouring spirit poison. Rather, the information had come from Nangong Yu, who had taken the bottle of poison with him, and several days later had ordered people to deliver a jade slip detailing the poison to her. Recorded on the jade slip was information regarding the devouring spirit's prescription and toxicity, with even a few detailed cases attached. With such a rare poison, she knew that within such a short period of time that she wouldn't have been able to find out such knowledge. Yet just recalling the shameless words that person had attached at the end of the jade slip caused Heshi's heart turn from gratefulness to resentment. That shameless bastard, who would like to think of him while lying awake restless and worried at night. Just dream on. Ouyang Zhixiong's and Ouyang Haoshuan's faces changed after hearing Heshi's explanation. Ouyang Zhixiong fiercely attacked a rock nearby, and after just hearing a bang, that rock that was as tall in height as half a person, instantly collapsed into dust. Who would be this vicious as to actually use devouring spirit to deal with my Ouyang family? He not only wanted to destroy Haoshuan, but also wanted to make our Ouyang family sink into a situation devoid of hope. Ouyang Haoshuan slightly moved his mouth as he sneeringly said, no matter who is it, since they dared to plot against I, Ouyang Haoshuan, then there will be a day where I must make them repay what they owe 1,000 times. Heshi wasn't interested in participating in the Ouyang family's revenge, and since the illness was already cured, she was naturally ready to leave. However, just when she was about to go, she heard Ouyang Haoshuan gently call out to her, Genius Dr. Shi, please stay a moment. Heshi turned around and saw the man who had been reclining on the rattan chair slowly stand up, his slender body appearing thin and weak under the sunshine, yet his back was quite straight. Genius Dr. Shi, can I call you Shiyu? The man's low and quiet voice was slightly hoarse, causing Heshi to raise her eyebrows yet not answer. Ouyang Haoshuan also didn't intend for her to respond, his mouth lifting into a shallow smile as he said, maybe Shiyu didn't take me seriously, but I still want to say it to you again. Young master, you have graced me with a new lease on life, so I, Ouyang Haoshuan, hereby vow that in the future if Shiyu has any requests of me, as long as it doesn't bring disaster to my Ouyang family, I will certainly to go through any difficulty to accomplish it for you. If I violate this oath, let me be struck with divine punishment." He stared blankly, while Ouyang Zhixiong was shocked, but immediately thinking of his son, who just half a month ago was dispirited and desperate, he felt relief. It wasn't an exaggeration to repay this life-saving kindness by willing to risk life and limb. He was surprised by Ouyang Haoshuan's eyes. They were too bright, too cold. They somewhat resembled an aurora blooming between glaciers, obviously dazzling to look at, yet without a trace of emotion. Subsequently, He felt a smile burst across her face, and without hesitation, she turned around and left Ouyang Manor. No matter what promises or oaths she heard, for her it was all meaningless. After all, the partner who had previously accompanied her for 10 years had easily betrayed her, isn't that so? Chapter 96, Close Relationship. He hadn't left Ouyang Manor for long when a carriage suddenly came from behind, rushing to catch up, before finally stopping in her path. A familiar snow-white horse stood in front of her, kicking its front hoof as it snorted arrogantly with its nose. The corner of He's mouth flattened, and sure enough, soon the carriage's curtain lifted, revealing Nangong Yu's face, which could turn all living things upside down. The distance from Yanjing City to the remote suburbs is quite far. It would be better to let me send you Shi-er. He didn't hesitate in refusing. We're not going in the same direction, it's too troublesome. Nangong Yu slightly smiled as he leisurely spoke. Who's not going in the same direction? This king just happens to be going to Tsang Mountain to attend to some business. Shi-er, if you're not going to get in, then this king will just have to force you like last time. He felt the veins in her forehead pop, and eventually unable to resist a certain shameless man, she jumped onto the carriage with a cold face. Before getting on though, she couldn't help but glance towards the man driving the carriage. Rather than seeing Qing Long, a refined-looking gentleman wearing moon-white brocade robes was sitting in the driver's seat. Compared to Qing Long, this man's facial features were far more outstanding, with sparkling eyes and a vivid and lively face. He and Qing Long were like polar opposites. Noticing He studying him, the man quickly hid his shock and displayed a carefree smile, saying, "Hello, I'm one of Master's personal servants, Bai Hu." He nodded to him without speaking, instead hopping straight into the carriage. Bai Hu's smile vanished as he murmured with astonishment, "My God, Master's sweetheart is actually a man. A delicate youth on top of that. This news is really too much." Bai Hu's heart longed to gossip about this news while he quickly drove the carriage forward, soon leaving behind Yanjing City and arriving outside He's shabby courtyard. After entering the carriage, He had decided not to provoke Nangong Yu, but unexpectedly, throughout the entire journey Nangong Yu hadn't spoken to her once. It was as if she didn't exist to him as he leaned on the soft cushions, leisurely flipping through a dilapidated ancient book. While on the contrary, He's heart was puzzled as she secretly glanced at him several times on the journey. Yet the entire time, up until the carriage stopped in front of her courtyard, Nangong Yu had completely ignored her, making her feel in a somewhat bad mood. Lightly jumping off the carriage, He was just about to walk into the courtyard when she turned her head and saw Nangong Yu, wearing a light reddish-purple robe, exiting the carriage too. With his hands behind his back, he slowly walked over to her, his solemn attitude clearly indicating that he wanted to follow her in entering the house. He's eyebrows raised, "We've arrived at my courtyard and you've sent me home, so why are you following me?" Nangong Yu laughed, his voice clear and pleasant to listen to. "Shi-er, with our relationship, how can this king pass your house without entering?" He gnashed her teeth, fiercely saying, "What relationship do I have with you?" Nangong Yu's figure suddenly flashed as he leaned closer to her, murmuring in her ear, "Don't you know? The kind with skin touching skin, a close physical relationship where partners are deeply attached to each other, that kind of relationship. Shi-er, are you still unable to remember?" Seeing He starting to get angry, he slowly made something up on the spot. "Not to mention, I've been working hard in order to lift the seal on Shi-er's Danton. Don't tell me I can't get compensation in advance?" Heard the words about unsealing her Dantian, Hushi's expression suddenly froze as she no longer had the confidence to retort. Chapter 97, Spiritual Kitchen Expert. Unsealing her dantian to enhance her strength was her top priority at the moment. Unfortunately, it just so happens that besides Nangongyu, there was no other person she could think of to help her. Heard the commotion outside, Wet Nurse Chen rushed to greet her young miss, yet was shocked upon seeing Nangongyu sticking very closely to Hushi. A strong and noble aura could be felt from Nangongyu's body, while his face was so handsome that it could stun and dazzle a woman. It was simply too oppressive. "Me? Young master, you've returned?" Wet Nurse Chen cautiously watched Nangongyu, still struggling to catch her breath as she asked, "And this person is?" Hushi glanced at Nangongyu and saw his indifferent expression. With his ice-cold eyes, it was like he was an immortal, looking at ordinary people as if they were ants. His aura was one that was so imposing that it deterred people from coming close, and compared to his appearance when he was in front of her, it was like there was two different people. When Nangongyu was like this, it more resembled the legendary king of hell who was known to be cold-hearted, cruel, and capable of killing without remorse, right? This is young Master Yu and his subordinate, Bai Hu. Hushi's face was taut as she introduced them, reluctantly adding, "My circumstances nowadays is thanks to their help." Wet Nurse Chen uttered a shocked exclamation, and suddenly her expression as she looked at Nangongyu and Bai Hu was full of gratefulness and admiration. Heshi had purposely spoken vaguely, letting Wet Nurse Chan mistakenly believe that Heshi was able to escape from Gluttonous House, and to now also be able to have such strong skills, due to Nangongyu. This was her Mrs. Savior. Suddenly, her instinctual fear of Nangongyu was forgotten as she politely invited the two guests to enter the house. Even Hushi was thrown to the back of her mind. "Young Master Yu, since you've come all this way to this small and remote courtyard, then it would be better if you could stay and have a meal. We don't have much, but I can assure you that we have the most delicious spiritual foods in the entire Jinling city here. Young Master Yu, you must taste it." Following behind Nangongyu, Bai Hu finally couldn't help but laugh. "The most delicious spiritual food, hee. Which type of most delicious food in this Jinling city hasn't my master yet tasted? Wet Nurse, isn't your boast a little too big? Especially looking around at this small shabby courtyard where there is no spiritual power fluctuations. This courtyard also didn't have a protection spell. How could they have enough crystal stones to build an expensive spiritual kitchen?" When Wet Nurse Chen heard this, she didn't feel the slightest bit humiliated or angry. Instead, she proudly turned her head to look at Hishi's cold face, then mysteriously said, "Young Master Yu and young Master Bai Hu wouldn't know, but our family's young master is a spiritual kitchen expert. I even dare to say that the delicious food she can make can't be matched by the top chef from the intoxicated immortal restaurant." Bai Hu's face still showed ridicule as he didn't believe her in the slightest. However, Nangongyu raised his brows in interest, and with a smirk, he looked over at Heshi. Why didn't this king know that she also had this kind of skill? Heshi's expression didn't change as she lightly said, "Wet Nurse Chen only selfishly said nonsense. Don't believe it." "How can it be nonsense?" Wet Nurse Chen said anxiously. "The young master, anyone in this courtyard who's eaten your cooking has highly praised it. If this old slave has lied, then let heaven's thunder strike me." "If you say it like that, then I must definitely taste it," said Nangongyu as he lightly smiled. In Hushi's heart she really wanted to be able to seal Wet Nurse Chen's mouth, but without the chance she could only gnash her teeth and say, "We don't have enough fresh ingredients in this courtyard, let's try it another day." This wasn't a lie, because although the courtyard stored many foods, most of it was low-rank spiritual beast meat used to prepare food for Shi Jia and the others. Shi Jia and the others' bodies were way down on the cultivation line, so their food didn't require much spiritual energy at all, but if Nangongyu were to consume this low-rank spiritual beast's meat, the effect would be the opposite of the desired result. Chapter 90. Freeloader Nangongyu only said two words, "Bai Hu." Bai Hu immediately revealed a pained face. He absolutely didn't believe that this cute little boy could cook delicious food, but since Master had given him an order, he had no other choice but to carry it out. Half an hour later, Hashi looked at the kitchen piled full of a large quantity of high-quality foods, including fresh and rich spiritual beast meat filled with spiritual energy. She simply didn't know what to say. But when she saw Bai Hu's doubtful eyes and Nangong Yu's meaningful sneer, her heart suddenly surged with haughtiness. Humph, this group of stupid people, daring to doubt her top-level cooking? Just wait until later when you'll want to swallow your tongues to savor every bite. Hashi quickly collected the spiritual beast meat into her space, leaving only a fragrant mountain pig and some condiment ingredients on the bench. Next, she removed a simple barbecue grill and seasoning from her space, placing it all in the center of the yard. What is this strange thing? Bai Hu muttered, isn't cooking supposed to be done in the kitchen with a condensed spiritual power flame? In the end, are you able or cook or not? Hashi ignored him, her hand that held a handle starting to move, spinning the fragrant mountain pig until the motion was extremely fast. The fragrant mountain pig's body size was small and easy to capture. Its meat was tender and delicious, so coupled with its rich spiritual energy, a martial artist would naturally prefer this as a food ingredient. The only disadvantage was that fragrant mountain pigs had a strong fishy smell that was extremely difficult to remove. Of course, a high-level chef would be able to get rid the smell, but using that kind of method would make the spiritual energy in the food almost entirely disappear. That Bai Hu chose this kind of ingredient was to obviously make it difficult for Hashi so that he could see her humiliated. At this moment, they could only see her using water to rinse the pig meat without adding any special herb ingredients to get rid of the smell, causing a sneering expression to subconsciously appear on their faces. However, in the next moment, the contempt in Bai Hu's eyes changed into astonishment. He didn't know when, but more than a dozen silver needles had appeared in Hashi's hand. Her actions were extremely quick as she inserted the needles into the pig meat. The meat that was originally still overflowing with spiritual energy was now covered by something similar to an invisible barrier, firmly locking all the spiritual energy inside of it. Heavens, this is possible? Hashi didn't pay any attention to Bai Hu's exclamation. Instead, her hands started moving faster, and after ensuring that the spiritual energy in the spiritual beast meat wouldn't be lost, she began to empty the fragrant mountain pig's abdominal cavity. Next, she quickly filled the inside with all kinds of herbs and fruits, using snow ginseng to get rid of the smell and increase the flavor. Following that, she then got Shaoli to come help her, smearing it layer by layer with all kinds of seasonings that were just mixed a few days ago. Bai Hu watched on with a stunned expression. He had never seen someone cooking fragrant mountain pig with such a method before. As Hashi's slender and elegant fingers moved, it was very natural. Comparable to moving clouds and flowing water, it was extremely pleasing to the eyes to watch and helping to greatly increase a person's appetite. It was enthralling, yet Hashi suddenly lifted her head and beckoned towards him. Burn the charcoal in the grill. You're ordering me to burn the charcoal? Bai Hu exclaimed, but I'm Master's personal bodyguard, the majestic Hell King manners. You can't even light the charcoal? Hashi looked at him with contempt, then looked at Nangong Yu. All your people in Hell King's manor are freeloaders? Bai Hu suddenly burst into tears. In his heart he shouted, how can I be a freeloader? I'm the one who bought this fragrant mountain pig. I bought it. I bought it. But when he made contact with his master's deep eyes, Bai Hu became terrified and obediently threw a fireball into the grill to light the charcoal. It just so happened that he was a martial artist with a double attribute that included golden fire. Soon, the charcoal started heating up, and once it had reached a sufficient temperature, Hashi placed the pig meat on the grill and began to slowly turn it. Chapter 99. Ravenously devouring with the charcoal being heated by the fire, the fragrant mountain pig began to roast and be coated with a layer of crisp golden skin, with the smell beginning to permeate throughout the yard. Bai Hu, in accordance with Hashi's requirement, was standing on the side to moderate the temperature of the charcoal, swallowing from time to time as he stared without blinking. Suddenly, his stomach issued a loud gurgling sound, making Shaoli, who was standing nearby, chuckle when she heard it. This in turn made Bai Hu's face instantly redden. This is too shameful. Yet, what smell is this? How can it be so fragrant, causing a person to be so tempted to taste it? Bai Hu couldn't help but secretly glance at his master. His master was completely focused on the busy youth tending the grill, his eyes shining brilliantly, as if he was looking at a potential treasure. Taking advantage of the time it took to roast the fragrant mountain pig, He quickly made a salad and some soup. The ingredients and methods used for making both were simple. The ingredients were grown in the ancient Rhyme spiritual field, helped to grow with water from the ninth secluded spiritual spring, and after adding seasoning, the food would be delicious and rich with spiritual energy. It completely couldn't be compared with ordinary spiritual food. When Shaoli passed by Hu as she walked over carrying 2 bowls of the prepared dishes, a tantalizing fragrance assaulted his nostrils, the roast meat so fragrant it caused Bai Hu to gulp and feel agitated. "Hey, you can eat now." Nangong Yu returned to his senses when he heard He call out, and looking up, he caught sight of a white robe and an elegant girl's face filled with a light smile. With picturesque features, her eyes shined like stars. On the table, tendrils of fragrance curled around the simple food, while the girl's originally somewhat glacial features had now become soft and warm. This was just like a warm family. Nangong Yu stepped forward, and sitting down at the table, he picked up the chopsticks in front of him to taste the food. The taste of the fragrant and tender pig meat lightly spread across his tongue, and with the fresh and rich spiritual energy accompanied by a slightly spicy flavor, it instantly stimulated the sensitivity of his taste buds. It was as if there was a gentle trickle of energy slowly being absorbed into his body, causing the fatigue in his body and spirit to gradually be swept away. He sat on the other side of the table with a hand under her chin. She was beaming as she looked at him. "How's the taste?" Nangong Yu lightly replied, "Not bad." "Humph, not bad? You say that, but your hand is moving so fast to eat. Isn't this like you're ravenously devouring the food? Wait a minute, you're actually going to directly use your hands to grab the roast meat. Aren't you His Highness Hell King, the idol of every girl throughout all of Jinling, and yet you're eating so vigorously like this? What about your image? In the time it takes to burn a short stick of incense, the 3 dishes and serving of soup on the table were all eaten clean by Nangong Yu. Bai Hu sullenly scowled. "Master, I helped to roast the food for so long and yet you couldn't even leave a little bit for me?" Even such a person like Master had kept eating, forgetting about everyone else. In the end, how delicious had those dishes been? He also would have liked to try tasting it. Wu Shaoli saw him looking so pitiful, and only then did she carry out prepared food for Shi Jia and the others from the kitchen to give to him instead. Of course, this food couldn't be compared in terms of taste and spiritual energy to the food that Nangong Yu had eaten. It wasn't until the sun had started setting in the west that Nangong Yu decided to take his leave. He sent them to the door and was about to return when Nangong Yu suddenly tugged on her wrist, causing her petite body to be tightly enveloped in his embrace. "Bastard! Let go!" Wet Nurse Chen and Shaoli were still watching them from behind. Nangong Yu leaned closer to her ear and whispered, "Tomorrow I want to eat bergamot gold rolls you were mentioned earlier, so remember to prepare it." He glared at him. "What reason would I have to do that? This guy is insatiable." Chapter 100. People from Nalan Manor. Nangong Yu looked down at her with a gentle and warm smile. "Also, the snacks that your little servant had spoken, I want to try every type of them. That's all for now." Finished speaking, and without waiting for He to answer him, he turned around and entered the carriage. He was alone as she stood by the courtyard gate, angrily gritting her teeth. "That's all for now. Who does this bastard think he is?" What made He depressed was that one word from the Hell King really carried an enormous weight, completely preventing people from going against it. From that day forward, every few days, Nangong Yu would come to her small courtyard to be a freeloader. He claimed it was an advanced reward for his services. Even if he himself didn't have the free time to come, he would order Bai Hu to come collect the packed food. This caused Bai Hu, the gossiper with a big lively stomach, to become familiar with the people in this courtyard. Since eating Heshi's finely made dishes, Baihu had admired Heshi. Previously he had despised her, but now he flattered her to curry favor with her. Things continued like this for more than half a month, until one day, news from Nangongyu stopped arriving. Even Baihu's visits started decreasing. When she asked Baihu about Nangongyu's whereabouts, all she got in return were vague responses. His eyes showed his alertness and suspicion that he was excluding her, making Heshi feel bad. Today when Baihu came to collect the food, he noticed that both Heshi and Shaoli refused to acknowledge him, so he moved closer to them in embarrassment. Young Master Shi, these days Master is really busy, so he's unable to come over. In the midst of his busy schedule though, he still found time to order me to look after you, young Master Shi. Heshi uttered an indifferent, "Ew." It was neither angry or happy. In fact, it was as if they were only talking about an insignificant person. When Baihu remembered that his master really valued this youngster, his heart couldn't help but tighten, while cold sweat dripped down his back. This is all Qing Long and Zhu Kei's fault. Those two guys would repeatedly caution Baihu to be wary of unknown people scheming against Master. Coupled with the fact that Master was now in his most critical time, it had made Baihu's attitude towards this young Master Shiyu somewhat cold. The result was that when he went to deliver the food to Master that day, Master's expression had unexpectedly sunk. Obviously when he looked at the spiritual food it was exactly the same. Smell, look and taste were all great, while the spiritual energy was also rich, yet in the end, just how could Master tell that the taste was different? He was even able to feel that young Master Shiyu was unhappy just by the taste of the food. Since then, despite how much slandering Qing Long and Zhu Kei would do, Baihu no longer dared to ignore this young Master Shiyu even a little bit. He has never seen Master so attached to a person before, regardless of whether that person was a man or a woman. So, as long as he is Master's sweetheart, he, Baihu, swore to protect him. Not to mention, young Master Shiyu's foods were so delicious that if he offended him, wouldn't that mean no more food for him in the future? Baihu was lost in his thoughts when suddenly he noticed wet Nurse Chen hurriedly running over. Instead of her usual kind expression, her face showed panic as she called out, "Miss, miss. People from Nailin Manor have come." Wet Nurse Chen's heart was very panicked, as the terror caused by Nailin Manor had left a deep-rooted scar. Even now, though her miss has become stronger, she was still unable to control her fear of Nailin Manor. So being that she was in such a hurry, she didn't pay attention to Baihu and shouted out Heshi's usual address. Baihu opened his eyes wide in surprise as he looked at Heshi. Although he had long suspected, especially after Zhu Kei's implied words, that young Master Shiyu is a girl, but how could there be such a magical technique to change one's appearance in this world? Chapter 101. Damaging Nailin Manor's reputation. His cultivation base is so high, yet he unexpectedly couldn't tell at all that this person is a woman disguised as a man. Heshi didn't panic, because for her, Baihu knowing her true gender was simply an insignificant matter. However, just thinking about Nailin Manor, and also Nailin Feishue, who caused the death of Nailin Heshi, the corner of her mouth raised slightly, revealing a cold expression. Her hand gently moved, like the flutter of a thin cicada wing, and suddenly a human skin mask appeared in her hand. After lightly wiping her face, she then applied the mask. In the next moment, her youthful delicate skin, with an elegant and beautiful appearance, had now transformed into that of an ugly girl. Her complexion was now malnourished and sickly, with her skin dried up and swollen around her eyes. Baihu looked stunned as he pointed at Heshi's face, speechless for half a day. At this moment, a rough and fierce roar burst forth from the door. "Get off! Don't you know who I am? How dare you block me? You all must be really impatient to die." The backyard's gate was savagely pushed open, and an unusually tall and sturdy man dressed in blue walked in with large strides. From his appearance, he looked to be around 40 years old. With a fierce-looking face and the tip of his eyes slightly squinting, he emitted a ruthless aura. This man's name is Qin Lu. He's a slave from Nailin Manor and was one of Zhang Dezhong's men. Due to the disappearance of Zhang Dezhong some time ago, Qin Lu had filled the gap of his absence and was promoted to head butler. He was currently very proud of his success. However, once Bai Hu saw him, his face revealed nothing but disdain. This man was merely trash on the third rank of the qi refining stage. If he were to be assigned a place in Hell King Manor, he wouldn't even be able to find work sweeping the floor at the most remote courtyard. Wet Nurse Chen was terrified, yet still quickly walked forwards and blocked him, saying, "Butler Qin, we are honored by your presence, but whatever is the matter? It's better to tell this old slave. This old slave will then pass it on to Mississippi. Get out of the way, damned old woman." Qin Lu raised his foot and kicked Wet Nurse Chen, then said with disdain, "Who do you think you are? What sort of qualifications do you have to speak to me? Quickly call Nailan Hushi out here. I came here with orders from Madam." Finished speaking, he no longer looked at Wet Nurse Chen and taking big strides, he walked into the backyard. Yet just as he entered the backyard, Qin Lu's footsteps halted, his face showing a surprised expression. Not only was Heshi sitting in the yard, casually drinking tea from a cup she held, but standing beside her there was a little girl who was arranging refreshments for her, while several tall and strong men were guarding her. Close by her side, there stood a graceful and outstanding man who was unfamiliar to Qin Lu, yet he had a sinister-looking smile upon his face as he looked at him. Qin Lu couldn't believe his eyes. Is she really that third Miss Nailan Hushi, who would only keep her head down while shrinking her shoulders and crying? He looked carefully at her again. If it's not third Miss, then who else could it be? Who else had that same pale complexion, with the same ordinary physical body without spiritual power? Humph, she's only trash. Did she think she could threaten me just by gathering some ordinary people to fill this yard? She's dreaming. Thinking till here, Qin Lu's anger increased, so walking forwards in large strides he arrogantly faced Nailan Hushi and sneered, "Third Miss really has great style. I haven't seen you in a few months, yet from where did Third Miss manage to hook these wild men? Clearly you aren't afraid that your reputation as a fickle woman would spread to the public, damaging Nailan Manor's good reputation." Chapter 102, Properly Teach You a Lesson. Heshi hadn't yet responded when Bai Hu suddenly burst into laughter. "Nailan Manor's good reputation? I'm really sorry, but how come I didn't know about Nailan Manor's good reputation? Didn't the second miss from your Nailan Manor, Nailan Feishue, seduce young Master Zhu Zhongba from the Zhu family? The news that she stripped him using violent means has already spread everywhere. Still using her strength against him, even though you can tell with one look that Zhu Zhongba is trash, hee. The people from Nailan Manor are really well educated." Once Qin Lu heard Bai Hu's words, his face turned red. With his eyes expressing how humiliated and angry he was, his body slightly trembled with his rage. Even Hushi wore a surprised expression on her face. It was unexpected that the rumor had spread to such a wild degree that it has already reached Yanjing City. This news really pleased her because if it wasn't thanks to Bai Hu, she never would have heard such amusing news as she had been busy lately with sorting out her space and helping Shi Jia and the others with their training. Thinking of this, she raised her head and glanced at Bai Hu with appreciation. Bai Hu straightened his posture, immediately beaming with joy. "Young Master Shiyu? Wrong, it should be Miss Nailan. She's finally not angry anymore. There'll be no problem with the food in the future now." Qin Lu finally recovered his wits and wanted to rush over to give Bai Hu a lesson right away. However, the atmosphere focused around Bai Hu couldn't help but cause him to shudder. Although Bai Hu had restrained the power in his cultivation base, due to his rank, it was impossible for it not to make an impact, resulting in Qin Lu instinctively feeling fear. He was used to being the one who took unfair advantage of a situation to bully others, so in the face of Bai Hu's aura, he had no courage, immediately choosing to rush towards Heshi instead. "Little slut, isn't it you who incited your pretty boy to slander our second miss and Nailan Manor? Nailan Manor raised you for so many years, yet you're a slut who kicks their benefactor. Not only do you not know how to be grateful, you even let your lover slander Nailan Manor. On behalf of Madam and second miss, I will now give you a proper lesson." Previously, When Qin Lu had followed Zhang Dezhong to this courtyard to deliver food, he had also used the opportunity to torture this third Mississippi. Because although Nalan Heshi had the noble title as the third miss of the Nalan family, her nature was one of an incompetent coward, and when facing a beating and getting scolded, she could only weep. Whenever he thought of himself beating the third miss, seeing her shivering pitiful body, his tyrannical heart would become excited. Therefore, when he thought he would get to beat her again, with this third miss curled at his feet and begging for mercy, his face flushed while his body trembled due to excitement. Bai Hu noticed the evil glint in Qin Lu's eyes, which made his own eyes turn cold. She is the person Master cares about and cherishes, yet unexpectedly this guy dares to be so arrogant and humiliate her. He should just die 1,000 times. However, before Bai Hu could make a move, Thongsen, who had been standing on the side, suddenly rushed forward. With his hands as fast as lightning, he pressed down on Qin Lu's shoulder, buckling it as he forcefully poured in his spiritual power. Qin Lu felt a sharp pain in his meridians, making him unable to move even a single step. Then, Zhang Sen lifted his foot, ruthlessly kicking Qin Lu's knee. With a heavy-sounding thump, Qin Lu was forced to kneel on the ground, while his head was also pushed down, resulting in him kowtowing to Heshi. A piercing pain came from his knee, and following that pain, his meridians being invaded by spiritual power caused him to release a pained howl. Heshi, who was still sitting beside a stone table, was acting like she didn't hear or see any of it. Leisurely, she reached across, and grabbing a piece of sugar-steamed cheese that Shaoli had prepared, she gracefully placed it into her mouth. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.